All right. Well, welcome back to session. It's Tuesday, September 11th, 2018, and we have often an invocation, and today there's no invocation, and we usually substitute that with a moment of silence. And today it's particularly fitting as it's the anniversary of a day that we'll all, those of us who are old enough to remember, will never forget. And a day that certainly changed all of our lives in many ways. We still have ongoing war in Afghanistan. We have many sons and daughters of Montgomery County families serving in the military or have served. So many consequences of that terrible day. On that day, there were 11 county residents who lost their lives. So I'll now read the names of those residents. They were at the Pentagon, and the name of each victim is inscribed on a bench in the park located in Rockville at the corner of Jefferson Street and Maryland Avenue, to ensure that we never forget. William Caswell, Gerald Fisher, Lawrence Getzford, Michelle Heidenberger, Angela Hautz, Ted Moy, Darren Pontel, Scott Powell, Todd Rubin, Patricia Statz, and Ernest Wilcher. So, 9/11 means so many things to all of us in different ways. We'll now take a moment to pause and reflect. Thank you. Now we'll turn to our items of general business. I understand there's no announcements or petitions to just mention today, Clerk Lamarzi, so we'll turn to the approval of minutes from July 17th, 2018. And those minutes were approved in advance to all were distributed in advance to all council members. Are there any changes to the minutes? All right, seeing none, the minutes are approved as distributed. And now we will turn to the consent calendar. There are a number of items. First, I'll ask for a motion.
So moved.
It's been moved by Council Vice President Navarro and seconded by Council Member Sidney Katz. And the lights are on. There's a few items that are significant to comment upon. I'll mention one or two, and others may mention others. There's been item D, a lot of discussion about the contractor for the school bus safety camera program, and we will address issues with that contract as that item comes to the committee, and there will be a public hearing scheduled on that item September 25th at 1:30, and we have the designation of non-competitive award status for several entities. What this means is a few nonprofits that have been added to a list where they can receive contracts according to an appropriation that the council has established. And in this case, that is the appropriation to provide legal assistance, support for legal assistance for those residents who are in deportation proceedings. And this council went through a very significant community dialogue last spring, and we added $370,000 to the council budget in FY19 to support nonprofit organizations that provide legal assistance for people who have been subject to deportation proceedings targeted by this administration in ways that are unprecedented, including, among them, the separation of families, children from their parents at the border. And sadly, there are children who have ties to our community who have been separated from their parents. And one of the organizations on our list today, KIND, Kids in Need of Defense, provides support and representation to those children. And so it's a good example of the potential to provide meaningful support in this area, and I think a reflection of the wise adjustment and approach that the council adopted last spring, and we'll look forward to hearing more about the awards that may be provided as a result of this designation. So today's action is a resolution to amend a previous resolution so that those appropriations contracts could be provided. And Mr. Katz.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. I wanted to call attention to item J, which is the introduction for a special appropriation for to strengthen the drug court that we have. This would allow for an additional someone from the additionally from the Health and Human Services to help in that court. It amounts to almost $71,000. It's certainly needed. We're in an opioid crisis in America and throughout Maryland and in Montgomery County as well. And of course, it should be noted that this is the month to educate our neighbors because this is actually a National Recovery Month. I attended, I guess last week, the days run together 2 weeks ago now, the memorial service for people that have lost their lives for overdose. And I would hope that everyone could consider supporting this because it's certainly needed.
Thank you, Mr. Katz. All right, so the consent calendar is before us. All those in favor, show of hands. And that is unanimous among those present. All right, 6 minutes ahead of schedule. Wow. Yeah, we will now slow to a crawl to discuss traffic on 495 and 270. And we're going to get a briefing today from council staff and the planning board staff. As I think most everyone knows, the governor has announced his intent to expand 270 and 495. He's put forward a vision of adding 2 lanes in each direction to both highways. And that is a pretty significant proposal that is working its way through the process of soliciting RFP responses. But the county council has long been on record with a recommendation for adding capacity to 270 and the spur of 495 all the way to the border with Virginia. And so we're going to have a chance today to get an update from council staff about what they know of the governor's proposal, and we'll also discuss the council's longstanding master plan vision. And I want to note that we did invite the Secretary of State Highway Administration to be here. They did not want to have that conversation at this time, and so we're nevertheless taking the opportunity here to have our own dialogue and prepare for the next step. And I'll turn it to the chair of the Transportation Committee, Mr. Berliner.
Thank you, Council President. First time this came to at least my attention was a conversation with Mr. Anderson before the T&E committee, in which we understood that our park and planning people are more formally engaged in this process than our county by virtue of the decisions that have to be made. And therefore, park and planning would be, quote, signing off on certain things that perhaps the council has a different view of. And so the question fundamentally from my perspective as T&E and suggesting that we have this conversation is, what's the role of park and planning vis-a-vis the county council? And should park and planning submit, for example, anything it proposes to the council for its review to make sure that anything that park and planning signs off on is something consistent with the council's view of what ought to happen? So that, to me, was the fundamental purpose of this conversation, was to understand their role, our role, the county's role with respect to reviewing this proposal.
Thank you very much, Mr. Berliner. Mr. Leventhal.
I just want to say I am a little, I'm not disappointed with anyone here, but given the publicity around this, I was under the impression that the state of Maryland might be giving us a briefing. So I'm a little surprised and disappointed to find, not disappointed with anyone here, but I don't find that even when Secretary Ron came here at our request, that there's been really any dialogue at all. I don't know if Mr. Leggett, and we'll hear about this, I guess, from County DOT, but to what extent is local government in dialogue or in conversation about this? Is the state proceeding entirely on its own? There's all kinds of implications for neighborhoods and neighborhood traffic and homes, and I mean, we had briefings on the Purple Line repeatedly under many administrations, Ehrlich and O'Malley and Hogan. This is a project which is larger in scale and cost than the Purple Line, and yet as we're not getting briefed by the state, and there hasn't been any consultative process as far as I'm aware. So I guess I naively assumed that we were going to hear from the state. I was like, oh, good, let's hear what their plans are. That's apparently not the case, so that's disappointing.
Yeah, we invited them, and they declined to join us for this discussion today. And not only that, but I think Mr. Owen will explain, there's been some changes in the federal process, where the federal process might have normally been a 5 or 6 year process, and apparently now could be as short as 2 years. So there's a lot of, fast-moving planning happening, and we want to be right at the table. So today's discussion is part of that agenda. So Mr. Owen, could you also include in your comments here just a detailed explanation of what the State Highways said in response to our invitation? Mr. Hooker.
Thank you, Mr. President. Well, yeah, since Mr. I thought I was going to do this later, but since Mr. Leventhal opened the door, just speaking for my own constituents, I feel like it's incredibly irresponsible that the state is not here. And as much as I love to see all of your faces every morning, especially the first morning back, and yours too, Sydney, I think the timing gives credence to the sense the public has that regardless of the merits of this, and this will be thoroughly debated on the merits, the timing, people certainly have the impression that this is a cynical political exercise that gives the administration the appearance of doing something bold and innovative about beltway traffic in the 4th year of their administration while leaving all the thorny details till after the election. And unfortunately, I feel like it's having the opposite effect because it has sown so much discord and anxiety in the community. People, neighborhood listservs that are normally talking about backyard barbecues are talking about which houses are going to be taken. And people are very nervous about what's going to happen to their neighborhood, their individual homes, their hospital. In the case of Holy Cross Hospital, people stop me in the grocery store wanting to know, what I know, and they're laying bets on which of their neighbors is going to lose their home. And that's not good for any of us, and I don't believe it's really good for the governor. They were temporarily elated when he said on camera that no homes would be taken, and I think we should hold him to that. But then he's apparently tried to back away from those remarks. So I'm eager to hear from all of you, but I think, Mr. Leventhal, it certainly lends credence to the impression that people have that the timing of this, at least, is driven by the politics. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hooker. All right, Glenn, you'll begin the presentation.
Good morning. Thank you. We have with us today, by the way, Casey Anderson, Chair of the Planning Board, Gwen Marcus, Planning Director of Park and Planning.
Right.
What did I say?
About,
Marcus?
It's been about 21 years.
I remember when you were just that, Gwen Wright. She was Gwen Marcus a long time ago. Carol Rubin is the acting deputy director and also manager of the study from the park and planning standpoint, and Chris Conklin is the deputy director for transportation policy for County DOT. Just a little bit of background first. The county's position, to the extent it has a position so far, on 270 and 495 historically is this. On 495, the master plan allows for the widening of the beltway by 1 lane in each direction from the west spur, where the west spur of 270 meets the Beltway, over to Virginia. And those two lanes, the one lane in each direction, would either be an HOV lane, high occupancy vehicle lane, or a high occupancy toll lane. That's it. That's all the improvements that are called for in the master plan that are of a major sort that would be master plan eligible. For 270, the county's position, this is both the executive and the county council, position was last taken actually 9 years ago at the end of the I-270 US 15 multimodal corridor study, which also looked at 270 but also looked at the Corridor Cities Transway. The recommendation was that we add 2 lanes to 270 north of 370 up to the county line, and that those 2 lanes in the middle would be reversible, be southbound in the morning, northbound in the evening, and they would be restricted to either HOV or HOT. And there was a further provision that even by doing that, we had to make sure that the general use lanes in the long term did not fall below level of service D. Those are the positions of the county at this point. I know that last position for 270 is 9 years old. The Beltway widening in the west section in master plan, that was a master plan that was adopted about 15, 16 years ago. The state has had a capital Beltway corridor study for more than 2 decades. It's mostly been dormant. It's risen up now and then. Of course, it's rising up again with this study. 270, as I mentioned, there was the I-270 US 15 study that went all the way to Frederick. It sort of died on the vine in 2009, 2010, after everyone gave their recommendations and sat for many, many years. In passing, of course, you know there is the Innovative Congestion Management Study, which was done early on in this administration by State Highway. They've come to conclusions what they're going to do, and some of those projects are under construction. None of those improvements are really counter to the current master plan, because those improvements to I-270, which is the $100 million study that you recall, are things like ramp metering, extending acceleration lanes, deceleration lanes, very short sections of widenings in the collector distributor lanes just to improve flow between one interchange and the next. Relatively minor improvements, not mainline widening of the road beyond the 12 lanes that are there in the lower section. Okay, so that's where we are in terms of master plans. In terms of correspondence between this county and the state, the T&E committee wrote to Pete Ron, Secretary of Transportation, back last fall, asking that the I-270 study be concluded, and the council reiterated T&E committee reiterated the council's position on that. And essentially, Mr. Ron wrote back essentially acknowledging the letter, but saying that there would be this more detailed study which would look at more than that. And then in the spring, the state announced that it was going to split the I-270 and 495 studies into 2 parts. The part that's being undertaken now is all of the Beltway and I-270, but only as far north as I-370. And the piece of I-270 from I-370 all the way north to the city of Frederick was going to wait for a later study. In that case, there was a letter that was sent by a joint letter by the 2 county executives and the 2 council presidents of Montgomery and Frederick County to the secretary saying, no, keep it all together. How can you figure out what the effect of one is without looking at both? The response was that typically in the NEPA process, you don't have a project as large as the entire Beltway and all of 270, and so they needed to break it up, and that the second study, the follow-up study for the piece of the northern part of 270, would start in next year, 2019. Earlier communications didn't say when it would start. So that's the background. Then this past spring, the studies began in earnest. There were workshops held in the communities, in several communities in Montgomery and Prince George's County. And over the course of this spring and the summer, a purpose and needs statement was created. The state has received comments from most everyone by now, including from Park and Planning and from County DOT, as to what should be included in the purpose and need. And when we get a little later with Carol and Chris's part of the presentation, they'll talk a little bit about their comments there. But essentially, the comment period for the purpose and need statement is essentially over. The next stage is the development, the unveiling, if you will, of what's called preliminary alternatives. And these are the 15 alternatives that you've seen or read about. There's actually 15 alternatives and 4 sub-options, so there's really more like 19. These are, I'm going to characterize them as essentially throwing spaghetti against the wall, see what sticks. If you recall the Intercounty Connector study, at this stage of the process, there were dozens of preliminary alternatives. You would go to a public meeting in 2003, and you'd see a map on the wall with lines everywhere. The idea is that under NEPA, National Environmental Policy Act, you have to look, at least initially, at any possible plausible alternative. And so many of these alternatives that are put out there are, in fact, they all are really generic alternatives. I don't believe really any serious engineering's been done on any of them. I've talked with the state folks about it. They didn't want to come down today because, frankly, they didn't want to get engaged too much in these preliminary alternatives because they thought the real focus ought to be once they get down to the next stage, which is winnowing those down to a smaller set. I'll say 3 or 4. It could be 5, could be 2. It won't be 2. It'll be 3 or 4 or 5, most likely, which will at least have some analysis done behind them, traffic forecast, an initial environmental screening of community impacts and other measures of benefits and costs to get it down to a smaller set. And at that point, folks will be asked for comments again as to what should be retained for detailed study. It's literally called ARDS, Alternatives Retained for Detailed Study. That decision point probably will come early in 2019. Initially, we thought it was going to be late, maybe in December, and I know I worked with Megan to try to work up the time for the council schedule. Last communications I had just yesterday appears like it's more likely to be, for the coming before the planning board and the council, more likely in late January, early February, that time frame.
Glenn, when you say alternatives, when I look in the presentation, I see cross sections. Does that imply, well, this cross-section for the entire, both highways? I mean, what's an alternative? I see cross-sections. Why are they described as alternatives? I think there's confusion about that point.
Well, the alternatives, a fully fleshed out alternative would have cross-sections, in other words, how many lanes and what types of lanes there would be in each part of the road. I think in the presentation that was made to the commission back on July 18th, which is the presentation I've included in the packet. I'm going to sort of abbreviate, go through it today. They said that it was hard for them to actually identify what the impacts would be because although it might show 10 lanes or 12 lanes in this section, it may not be quite that in another section. It may differ bit by bit, piece by piece. Probably when they come back with the alternatives retained for detailed study, there still will be generic alternatives, but a lot of the preliminary alternatives will have been screened out. And then at that point, from that point on, for the next 8 to 12 months, they'll be fine-tuning those alternatives to the point where at least the engineers will believe they're reasonable. And then, of course, it's the judgment of the elected officials as to whether, and ultimately the governor, what's reasonable and what's doable. Well, and the next thing I'm going to do after another couple slides is to actually go through these generic alternatives, but I can almost guarantee there's been almost no engineering done on any of these alternatives, to at least when they were first proposed. They're totally generic.
They're basically function. Hi, Carol Rubin. I would just say it this way on the alternatives that have been presented so far. They're really function over form. In other words, they have no idea how they're going to accomplish these, but it's how they want the road to function. Is it going to be hot lanes? Are they going to be HOV? Is there going to be transit? Those are the kinds of things that they're looking at right now.
And before we leap in, since Carol is going to be making a number of comments, I wanted to just briefly explain Carol's role. Carol has been wonderful as acting deputy director for 8 months. She has transitioned from that position. We do actually have a new deputy director who's with us today, Tanya Stern. You'd stand up, so you'll get a chance to meet her at a future date. But we were able to keep Carol in the planning department, and she is going to be a special project manager specifically for this project, and will coordinate not only planning comments, but also the park comments, because that is a unique situation for the Maryland National Capital Park and Planning Commission. We are actually property owners as well as a reviewing agency. We are affected property owners, and so she'll be coordinating with our Montgomery County parks and our colleagues in Prince George's County, because this affects Prince George's County as well. So Carol is going to be our go-to person on this project specifically. Just wanted to explain that.
If I can, let me go through the slides. And I'm not going to go through all of this. A lot of it is just not necessary for this presentation. And you have the full presentation in your packet, but again, I'm just going to skip around. The first slide that's on the screen is just existing traffic conditions. As you know, things are really, really bad and have been for many, many years on 270 and 495. There's an average congestion, severe congestion lasts 7 hours a day on average for I-270 and 10 hours a day on 495. And in the future, and by 2040, traffic is even going to grow by more, somewhere between about 15%. The 10 or 15%. The next slide I want to show is, well, here's the breakdown of the study that I mentioned earlier. The section in green is what's underway now. The section in blue, north of 370, will begin in 2019. The NEPA process starts with scoping and then a preliminary range of alternatives and screening. You see a star that says "We are here." Actually, at this point, the star should be to the lower right-hand side of that first box, because that stage is basically virtually complete. The public workshops have been held on these preliminary alternatives, and the purpose and need has largely been defined. There's still some more concurrent statements to be made, but for the most part, that's behind us. And the next real step is the alternatives retained for detailed study, which the state will be working on over the course of the next several months, taking these 15 or 19 alternatives, winnowing down to a much smaller number based on traffic analysis, based on a first cut at environmental and community impacts, followed by the completion of a draft environmental impact statement, basically in about a little over a year from now, and then after that, a final EIS and record of decision in the spring of 2020. One of the questions that have been raised, is a good one, is where's the P3 sit in all this? The public-private partner. That partner has not been identified yet. There's a whole separate process happening for that. So what's really going to happen, I confirmed this with the state yesterday, is that really the state is going to carry this process through the record of decision. And at that point, they expect to have the P3 partner on board. And I asked the question, well, if the P3 partner is the one who's going to be asked to build and maintain this, who's to say that what you've come up with is something that they will want to do? And the response back was that there's still the opportunity to make further changes after record of decision. If they're relatively small, they can happen in design. If it's a major change, they may have to go back and do a supplemental EIS. So that's the response. The process, and this gets to the roles of each individual agency, there are various streamlining processes that have been approved by the federal government over the years, and within Maryland, one that's been approved is what's called the Maryland Transportation Environmental Regulatory Process, TERP. And the TERP process, based on the NEPA requirements, separates cooperating agencies from participating agencies. Cooperating agencies are ones that are supposed to work together to concur on purpose and need, on the alternatives retained for detailed study, and ultimately on the final alternative. Participating agencies are ones that comment. And so for example, and they work together, all work together in an interagency working group. This is the same structure that occurred under the Intercounty Connector and other major studies. That's not new. The cooperating agencies, the ones that have concurring powers, if you will, the local agency which is involved is, you see on the right-hand side, Park and Planning. And just as Gwen and Carol were saying, this is because they are the custodians of the parks, which these these properties, these roads often go through in either 270 or 495. They both go through parks. And the other agencies are federal and state agencies, which are sort of the typical major federal environmental agencies. They're participating agencies. There's more of them. There are more federal agencies, more state agencies, and the two county governments, actually two departments of transportation, both Montgomery County DOT and Prince George's DOT. You don't see the county council in here, or county executives, or state delegation, because what this process is about is get the agencies to cooperate within the development of these alternatives. They recognize the elected officials are the ones who are, depending on the level whose project it is, are the ones that makes actually the decision as to what project goes forward. But in terms of preparing the documents, the alternatives, the purpose and need prior to that, these are the agencies that are involved. And one of the things that I encourage at the very end of this, and Mr. Berliner talked about this already, is that at the end of this conversation today, try to see if you can work out an agreement as to, whether it's today or shortly follow up, as to how the councils and the executives too, point of view on these steps along the way can be incorporated in Park and Planning's comments. And they're already doing that for DOT. DOT, again, is just a commenting agency, but Park and Planning is working very closely with DOT to understand its concerns, and when they provide, when they finally sign a concurrence document on various steps, they would be incorporating what DOT is looking at. So there's a lot of cooperation going on right now. Then, let's see. Now we'll talk about the preliminary range of alternatives, and some definitions first. There are general purpose lanes, which are just lanes that can be used by anyone. Managed lanes, which are set aside for vehicles that are distinguished by the rules of the road. So, for example, an HOV lane would be a managed lane. If there were a truck lane, it would be a managed lane. If it was a bus lane, it would be a managed lane. Then there's priced managed lanes, which involve also congestion pricing, which is you would charge more at the busiest times of the day, whether it's sort of static congestion timing like you have in the intercounty connector, where you say at certain times of the day, it's in the middle of the day, rush hours, it's going to be high, middle of the day, it's going to be medium, late at night, it's going to be low. Or it could be something like in Orange County, California, where it's dynamic, where it changes every 5 or 10 minutes, depending on the demand that happens. That's all yet to be determined. There's a lot more not yet determined than determined, obviously. Also, we talk about contraflow lanes. Here, we're talking about lanes that exist, which would be reversed. In other words, you take a lane that's heading eastbound and say, no, in the rush hour, morning rush hour, maybe it's going to go westbound, and vice versa. Reversible lanes is usually when you're adding lanes and you're running them in one direction in one peak and the other direction in the other. And then transportation systems management and transportation demand management are both minor changes, in the first case to the capacity of the road, in terms of the way the road is built, and second in terms of the demand that's using it. So an example that combines both, it would be ramp metering, because ramp metering, you're talking about maybe some changes to the ramps to allow for more capacity on the ramps, but it's also controlling the demand that's coming onto the road. And demand management also, of course, includes telecommuting promotions, preferential parking, road pricing, et cetera. Essentially, that innovative congestion management plan that's being built by the state right now on 270 is TSM, and to some degree TDM. It's a large TS7 TDM, but that's really what it is. All right, so now the alternatives. Again, these are very high-level, broad-brush alternatives. One alternative that's carried all the way to the end is the no-build. And we have 8 lanes in the Beltway now and 12 lanes on 270 in the lower part of it. In at least the section that this first phase study is doing up to 370. The no build, however, will also assume that 270 will have the innovative congestion management improvements in it. That's typical. When we look at a no build, we look at everything that's either existing or under construction or programmed ahead of the project that's being studied. The next alternative is TSM TDM, number 2. Essentially, that's being done already on 270 with the innovative congestion management. There may be some other bells and whistles that are added as a result of this study, but maybe not. More likely, the new ideas would come up in regards to the Beltway itself. And in fact, there have been studies over the last many years really looking at some incremental improvements of this type to the Beltway. They've just never come to fruition. Alternative 3 is to add one general purpose lane in each direction on each road. So going from 8 to 10 lanes on the Beltway and from 12 to 14 lanes on 270. Just one more lane each direction for traffic of any kind. Number 4 is a one-lane HOV managed lane network. It would add a lane on 495 on the Beltway for HOV. It wouldn't do anything, and this is alternative to 270. 270 would remain the same. Alternative 5 would add a one-priced managed lane in each direction on 495. This is essentially a toll lane, or could be a hot lane, but more likely a express toll lane, and to convert the existing HOV lane on 270 to a toll lane. So you lose the HOV lane, and it becomes something that you can only use if you pay a toll under that option. Alternative 6, you would add 2 general use lanes in each direction on 495 and 270. In the case of 495, you'd have 6 lanes in each direction rather than 4. In the case of 270, you would have 16 lanes instead of 12, but it would be split between the main line and the collector distributor roads. So it would be, you see the pattern there, 3, 5, 5, 3, with the innermost lanes of the general use lanes actually being an HOV lane. Option 7, 2-lane HOV network, managed lane network. Here you add 2 HOV managed lanes in each direction on 270, and retain one one existing HOV managed lane and add 1 HOV lane in each direction on 270. So essentially make it so that you're widening 270 by 2 lanes and the Beltway by 4, so that on both you'd have HOV lanes, 2 HOV lanes in each direction. Number 8 is 2-lane price managed lane network on 495. You can see add 2 priced managed lanes in each direction on 495, toll lanes, and add a priced managed lane on 270, retaining the HOV lane, but the 2 additional lanes would be toll lanes. You can sort of get the sense of where this is all going. It's just sort of mixing and matching various types. Number 9, 2-lane price management lane network. Add 2 priced managed lanes in each direction on 495, and convert the existing HOV lane to a price managed lane and 1 price managed lane. So it's the same as 8, except in the case of 270, you're making them both toll lanes instead of retaining 1 as an HOV. Number 10. 2-lane managed lanes in each direction on 495 and 270, and retain an additional HOV lane. So now we're talking about 2, 4, 6, 8, 16 lanes again on 270. Number 11 is strictly only on 495, is to actually add collector distributor roads on each side of the Beltway, and reconfiguring the lanes, so instead of being 4 and 4, it would be 3, 3, 3, and 3, which, including the space between each of the roadways is pretty enormous width, actually. 12A takes the existing Beltway and says the inside lane in the off-peak direction. So let's say in the morning, we're talking about westbound in the center part of the county, that would be an eastbound lane. I'm sorry, just the opposite. The eastbound lane would be a westbound lane, and just the opposite in the evening. 12B, same kind of idea, but it's contraflow on 270 instead. The HOV lane, which exists only in the peak direction in the morning, we have the HOV lane heading southbound, but you also have the inside lane northbound, which operates as a general use lane. Instead of operating at northbound as a general use lane, operated southbound as a general use lane, and then just flip it over again in the PM. 13A, add 2 price managed reversible lanes on 495. And you'll see in some of these options where it's just one of the 2 roads, the other one says they could include improvements from the other alternatives. So really there's a heck of a lot more than 19 alternatives. There's probably, 4 dozen that you could probably come up with. 13B is convert the existing HOV lanes to 2 price-managed reversible lanes on 270. It means reconfiguring the road so those 2 lanes are together. You talk about a generic alternative. 14A, B, and C is transit. 14A, heavy rail, 14B, light rail, 14C, a fixed guideway, BRT, which would be in a separate alignment than 270 itself, given that these other alternatives could accommodate, and some of the alternatives could accommodate BRT on it, on the express lanes or the HOV lanes. No indication yet as to where this heavy rail would be, where the light rail would be. Are we talking about heavy rail north of Shady Grove only? Are we talking about a separate heavy rail line? Very fuzzy at this stage. And then finally, the 15th alternative is a dedicated bus lane. Up to now, all the dedicated lanes are for HOV or HOT. This would be strictly for buses, so carpools, van pools would not be allowed. So those are the 15 preliminary alternatives and some sub-alternatives, and again, even within that, you see you can mix and match. And there's a very screening criteria that they will be using that comes down from the purpose and need, having to do with engineering considerations. Does the alternative accommodate existing traffic or long-term growth? Does the alternative enhance travel time reliability? Does the alternative provide an additional travel choice while retaining the general use lanes? Will the alternative include complex operating configurations that lead to driver confusion? Homeland security, obvious issues, but can folks move around better in the case of an emergency? Movement of goods, a very important part of any kind of a transportation analysis is, can goods and services be provided more quickly, and to what degree than can be now? Financial viability is one of the screening criteria. This is a real issue because, as you mentioned, the governor wants to have this all paid for with tolls. And so one of the questions that came up at the commission meeting is, why are we looking at all these other alternatives which don't have tolls on them if the idea is that's supposed to pay for itself? Good question. From a NEPA standpoint, though, you do need to look at all alternatives, and it is conceivable, I think, that they could go through the study, find that none of the alternatives are financially viable without some kind of, and I'll use the term from the purple line, availability payment to make the difference between the toll or the lack of a toll and what the P3 provider needs to be able to break even, more than break even, to actually make the profit it's looking for. Multimodal connectivity is still part of the study as to how to make transit better to a certain degree, at least. And of course, environmental impacts is a key part of that. The next step, really, over the course of the next several months, is, as I mentioned, screening these 15, 19, 40 alternatives down to a very few. The state's going to be looking at traffic forecasts for each of these alternatives, trying to figure out what the benefits are, as well as the a general idea of cost. They won't have a final cost estimate by any stretch of the imagination. Community impacts, how many houses, businesses would be taken, where they would be, generally speaking, not a final number by any stretch. What the environmental impacts are in air, water, noise, historic features, everything. And then by January, they will come back to us, to everyone, saying, here are the small set of alternatives that we think are worth really spending a lot of time doing detailed study on. And that'd be a time for Park and Planning to comment as a concurring agency, for DOT to write a concurrence document because they're a concurring agency, for DOT to comment, for the council to comment, for the public to comment. There'll be public outreach there as well. So with that, let me, if I can, turn it over, unless there's any questions at this stage, turn it over to Chris, who's going to talk about the comments that DOT has made to the state
Okay.
on the purpose
We do have a
and
few
need.
questions, so
Sure.
we'll begin with those. Mr. Rice.
Well, thank you very much, Dr. Orland, and thank you, Mr. President. You know, it's interesting, and timing couldn't be more perfect. As I was driving in this morning for my 52-minute commute from Germantown to Rockville on 270, and my wife, who I was talking to, who was trying to commute to downtown Bethesda, who ended up canceling an appointment because it took her an hour and 15 minutes to get there, we need to start quantifying the effects that the lack of action by this governor has on our constituency. And I'm sick and tired of the Up County paying the price. You know, it's interesting because I'm curious, did our Department of Transportation ever see a value in breaking up the I-270 study into two parts? Mr. Conklin?
No, and in our comments, we suggested putting it back together, consistent with the bi-county letter that was submitted. this
Where
spring.
is the largest volume of traffic coming onto I-270 from? Is it the northern part or the southern part, Mr. Conklin?
I don't know the data. My guess would be that the northern part's feeding most of the.
I've actually read the study, and it is the northern part. With the amount of development that continues to happen, not only in northern Montgomery County, but also in Frederick and in Washington counties, if we're not paying attention to our hardworking teachers and firefighters and police officers who can't afford to live in Montgomery County and who actually live in some of our northern suburbs and have to commute every single day down I-270, this governor is committing a sham. And he's doing it over and over again, and we continue to take it instead of calling him out on the fact of saying, wait a minute, I'm sorry, you're going to do a study that doesn't even have half of 270, the part where the traffic is, and therefore it's going to be okay, and we're going to assume that it's going to happen? This study is nonsense, and I think that it's important for us to really start calling it what it is. It's a dog and pony show for the governor to get reelected, period, and for him to say that he's actually doing something when he's not, and for us to spin our wheels and to make it seem as though we're providing comments for something that ain't gonna happen, just like the CCT, that again, robbed the Up County of any kind of multimodal approach, is completely disrespectful to all of the residents, not only in the Up County of Montgomery County, but also in our northern regions as well. You know, it's interesting because a Brookings Institute study on traffic talked about multimodal approaches. It talked about traffic. It talked about other kinds of transportation options as well. But the governor stripped out the CCT, one of our top priorities as a county, as well as we've for a long time said that there needs to be reversible lanes on 270. How long have we had that, Dr. Orland, as a recommendation for the county council?
A few decades.
I'm sorry, say that again?
A few decades.
A few decades. Folks have to wake up. I mean, seriously. I mean, we can go ahead and have packets full of data and information, but the reality is if we don't have somebody at the top who's willing to do the work, who's willing to say, you know what, that the people matter and that we're going to make a difference in their lives and make a change, all of this is for naught. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Councilmember Rice. Mr. Katz. I didn't skip anyone, did I? Were you next? Yeah, thanks.
Thank you, Mr. President. You know, I agree much of what Councilmember Rice just said. Obviously, the Up County has been shortchanged for many, many years. And I appreciate the update. I mean, we're not yelling at the people sitting here. It's the people that aren't. And of course, I've attended a couple of meetings where the state was there. I saw many of you there. And of course, I am disappointed, as has been mentioned, that the state is not here today. But, you know, when you attended the meetings, you didn't necessarily get any great information. I mean, Glenn, what you went through today is exactly what you see at these meetings. They weren't allowing questions from in the larger group. They were only allowing questions at a round table type of a setting. And therefore, obviously, you don't know what every question was, and you can't sit at every round table with every group. But we've gotten very, very little information given beyond the alternatives or the options. And I know that the city of Rockville has sent a letter, or maybe more than one, but I know of a letter that are saying how concerned they are about whose home would be taken and whose home would be affected. And one of the meetings that I attended with the city of Rockville was that, or in the city of Rockville, was that people are very concerned that at this point, they don't know, they don't know if they wanted to sell their home, what the effect would have on it, if they wanted to remodel their home, whether or not, what they would do if the home was going to be taken. Then we see in the newspaper or in the media that it's been said that they're going to only be using the current right-of-way, or what is now the current right-of-way. Well, if they haven't been able to come up with information, if they haven't been able to come up with the statement saying what they're going to do, how do they know that? I mean, so at some point, this, to Craig's point, the dog and pony really is not, they're not giving us information that we can even work with. And it's not fair to the county, it's not fair to the municipalities that are directly involved, and it's not, candidly, fair to the state of Maryland, the way that they're doing this. And then I guess the question has to be, are they really following the federal setup? Are they really following the criteria that the feds have set up for this type of discussion?
My understanding is they are. I mean, again, Carol can weigh in on this. And
We have problems with it. I mean, I just want to start off by saying that we are suffering the same level of frustration as was clear in Councilmember Rice's comments. It's been very, very difficult. And we're trying to work as much as possible with the process that they've established in order to retain our seat at the table, rather than just being pushed aside, similar to what they're doing to the county, the executive branch, and to the council. So we have the same level of frustration. So we're trying to get those a process. We've established a process. We're working with them, but the best that we can. We are bringing on a NEPA expert to help us with this. But most of our comments to date have dealt with their process and the deficiencies in the process and in the analysis and in the parameters of the studies that they're using, and it's a very frustrating kind of exercise to get them to move off the mark. But they are insisting that they are going and using the NEPA process. Just to be aware, the federal government, through an executive order, has established a 2-year process for NEPA. They've shortened it, and that's what they're hanging their hats on. So whether or not they're actually complying, we're challenging that, and I'm sure they're going to get a lot of challenge from outside sources.
Well, and I thank you, and I'm not going to belabor the point, but obviously the way that this is going about, we have a transportation problem in Montgomery County and in Maryland. We have especially in Montgomery County, but to pretend that this is going to solve it, and have they even come back and said that if you do alternative, fill in one of the numbers, how much of a relief this would give for traffic?
To address that particular question, one of our comments or concerns is that they haven't even done.
We're still waiting for him. No. We jumped in.
Our concerns are that they haven't even addressed the basic fundamental questions of what is causing the problem. In other words, similar to what Councilmember Rice said, they just divided their study, and it doesn't make sense how they divided. We don't know, they haven't addressed origin and destination of travel. They haven't addressed whether it's through travel or commuting travel. They haven't addressed the patterns. So it's as I say, it's a very difficult exercise to go through.
Thank you very much.
I'll hold if there's other comments.
Councilmember Florine.
Thank you, and thank you all for coming. Actually, it was me. I was the one who asked that we have this briefing in the T&E committee in July, and so I'm glad that we are taking it up today as our first item of business. We've been listening to the community this summer, and these are all, really serious concerns. I've got a couple of questions. One is, there are 2 projects, basically. There's this, and then, what are we calling it? The Innovative Improvements, what is it? The TSM?
Innovative Congestion Management. which
Innovative
are
Congestion Management
essentially spot improvements.
thing,
that
the
are
spot
underway.
improvements. So Do we have a map or something of what, have they resolved what those solutions are that they're implementing?
Not all of them. They're taking them one at a time. As far as I know, the only one that they've completed is changing the number of lanes going from 270 southbound onto the Beltway towards Virginia. But they're in process on many of the others.
Well, it would be handy to know what it is that they're looking at as we go forward. I think there was a certain amount of confusion about what is that initial thing. That was the $100 million
Right.
initial Band-Aid project, and then there was this bigger. And Mr. Garson has a nice map of it back there, so we'll
It's-
get a copy from him.
It's a design build project that they understand generally what each of the improvements are going to be, but the details of how each are designed
Exactly,
is
yeah.
still being
Okay,
worked out.
well, I'd like to see that. It's very frustrating for everybody that there were so many unanswered questions, but at least we're having this conversation. For Pete's sake, when I first ran for office in 2002, one of the first meetings I ever went to as a candidate was the I-270 study effort up, I think it was up at Seneca Valley High School. And that got shelved, basically. And that was, 16 years ago. So at least we're having this conversation. And it's frustrating for people because of the lack of clarity about the contours of it. But at least it's happening. I mean, this is our biggest problem for so many people. I was on 270 today, coming south, and the same, Mr. Rice's experience is a daily challenge for all those people, so many of whom don't live in Montgomery County, and the connection up to Frederick and points beyond is obvious, and the failure to be addressed, that they're waiting to address that start next year, as I understand, is really something. But at least they're dealing with the Beltway and 270 conversation, and that's something that we need talked about. Are there any? It's all spaghetti against the wall? I mean, are there any constraints on all this? Like, as with respect to right-of-way? Like, obviously, if you're going to add 18 lanes to the Beltway, you've got a problem with where they might go. And so, I mean, is there any written limit to the nature of the conversation at this point? Other than what the governor said at a parade?
Not really. They'll be screening these against the screening criteria they establish, and
They'll
that's
throw
where,
the spaghetti up.
that's the filter for the spaghetti, the holes in the sieve, so.
So-
And if I could interject also through the Parks Department, because one of the concerns that we have is being able to address mitigation at a very, very, very quickly, and to understand what the impacts are from the park side to the parks resources, and a lot of other resources as well, but mostly the ones that we are owners, that we own,
well.
and that gets into our role. We've already started, the Parks Department has already started a worst-case scenario of looking at what would be the extreme decision, how that would, what kind of right-of-way that would require, and what the impact would be on the park's resources and historic resources as a start. And to start, we've started to identify ways that could potentially be mitigated, but it's a very difficult process because as you, to talk about the mitigation for just one second, is the ICC mitigation or park impact was 85 acres. Most of that was interior forest, and a lot of it was mitigated through replacement in the up county. And in this one, we're all down county. We don't want to do that again, and most of the resources that are being impacted are stream valleys.
Yeah,
You
it's very-
can't replace a stream valley
well-
anywhere. And so so we've at least started to identify the parkland impacts. Now, I get a lot of calls from people that are, as Councilmember Katz indicated, wanting to know if their house is going to be
Yeah.
impacted. We can't tell them anything, and I simply refer them to the state because we don't know what that outline. If we did an outline, it would be a significant impact, but that just scares people.
But, right, and that's the problem. I mean, it's some of these ludicrous options are simply that. I mean, and the question is, at what point will people know what to really focus on? Random comments by people, like no homes will be taken, is reassuring to some, but I don't think it reflects what SHA's current approach is. I doubt that that's likely to be what they're going to do or propose under any scenario. But are you saying, Glenn, that we will know in January what, like,
Their
a
belief is that
functional set of possibilities would be?
they believe that by late January, early February, they'll have their proposed alternatives to retain for detailed study. Again, I'm going to say
How many would they be likely to have?
I'm going to say 3 to 5. I don't know. It won't be 15. It won't be 10, but it'll be a much smaller number than what we
So
have
they
now.
don't have any criteria with respect to staying within the existing right-of-way
Not
for
necessarily.
any
Not
portion of this?
necessarily. I mean, it's likely that these screening criteria are going to weed out the ones that are just
Well,
not plausible.
I mean, we can all sit around now and
so
say,
it-
that's not going to happen, that's not going to happen, but
Right.
it's scaring people.
Well, that's
And
what
it
hap- but
puts
that's the
everyone in a
process.
tough situation.
That's again, I remind you of 2003. 2003, if you look at a map, the ICC alternatives, it covered everything between 270 and 95.
Right.
Seemed like almost every house was affected. Everyone was
Right.
everyone was freaking out. Okay.
So-
but then they got to the point of having 3 or 4 alternatives, which then of course the people who are closest to those alternatives
you
really
know what
freaked
you're
out,
arguing about.
and everybody else got calm.
Yeah, yeah. So what we can tell the community is
Logical.
that by February, we should know what the argument or what the concerns are, can legitimately be raised at that point. And right now, it's a more conceptual selection of options. I mean, heavy rail, I mean, great, we're going to run a new part of the metro under the Beltway or 270. I mean, you know, it's just, some of this is just silly.
Right.
It
One
seems
of,
to
one
me.
of the things that we're
I was
actually-
blown away when I saw that as
Yeah, well-
an option.
One of the things that our team, and I can go over that with you if you'd like, but one of the things that we're trying to do is to take a much more proactive approach on the working with them on the alternatives for detailed study. In other words, we're not going to accept their drawings and their alternatives as those are the choices. We know that there's going to have to be alternatives to that. There's going to have to be hybrids. There's going to also have to be other things to look at. For example, I'm just going to, we've talked about, is there a way to change the toll structure on ICC to make more people use it during the peak season so that it could draw some of the traffic off? Or is there a way of looking at the CCT as part of this, adding it to this project? Say if you're getting a concessionaire in, can you add extra years onto the concession?
Oh, yeah.
And just get them to pay for and get some of their
Well,
revenue
that-
from the CCT,
That-
which also could draw some of the traffic off of
That
of
CCT add-on
270.
has been talked about.
Right.
yeah.
In other words, we're trying to get the state to look at this not as a holistic transit solution based on land use, on land use practices, which is to spread the traffic, not to just keep throwing it at one place. And
Well-
that's our primary goal. So we're actually meeting tomorrow as a team to start looking at those alternatives, taking what they've provided, adding to it, thinking of what other things we could pull out of kind of other solutions, other master plans that we have, that you all have approved throughout the area that they haven't even considered.
So you're getting that in before they select
That is our
their
goal,
alternatives.
yes.
Well, that's a good thing. I applaud that. I do think the one thing, we do have to have a little reality check issue here. This is a national road. If you ask me, we don't have enough internal infrastructure for our residents so that, 270 and the Beltway are required locations for our residents to use to get from point A to point B in many cases. But it's also the way you get to the center of the free world, such as it is right now. The way you get from Boston to Florida in your car. I mean, it is a national road as well. And so it's not just us, which is, I think, part of the community challenge, because it serves so many functions. And so I do applaud the fact that this is occurring. I know it's really hard. I think the biggest thing for us the most important thing that we can do is to share with the community what the points of decision are, and when we will know what, if you're going to have a coalition, let's focus on something clear that we can have a conversation about, so you don't spin your wheels before you really have a point of debate. Hopefully, some of those points will be resolved. We're not going to take Holy Cross Hospital down. How are they going to? They're going to relocate the CSX bridge. I mean, there are things here that just seem to me to be such evident constraints as to their options that we may be left with what we've always been left with, unless there's some creative lane management program that can be put into place electronically within the existing right-of-way. But knowing what the contours of all that might be is going to be the most important thing for the state to alleviate community concerns and help us all focus on what's doable. So thank you for your work so far, and I think it's up to the council and the future council to expect a kind of regular briefing on this as you go forward, because of course you're expected to know the answers to all these things. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Elrich.
Yeah, one of our problems is going to be figure out where our action points are aside on briefings. I don't want continuous briefings on a descent into a very unpleasant project, because that will just be one depressing moment after another. I've been driving the Beltway in 270 just to look at what options might look like, and I've had a conversation with State Highway and with the state's representative at TPB about, at least on 270, they could gain a lane tomorrow by taking away the inside service lane. They don't have inside service lanes on all roads. And they could take away the inside service lane and fix the drains are only a problem because they kind of dip down and cars would hit the drain and do funny dips. But that's an easy thing to fix, and that and paint. And the same thing with the spur going toward the bridge. You can gain a lane pretty easily if you want to gain a lane pretty easily. And that could be the HOV lane, and then they would gain a regular lane in traffic. And it may not solve the problem, but it's another full lane with a fair amount of capacity. But I was always bothered by, going back to when we did take a position on the reversibles, that the state even then had stopped its conception of the project north of here. And so to me, all you would do is speed people to the point in the road where it chokes anyway. And it seems that, one, you have to deal with the American Legion Bridge, which becomes a choke point all the way back that affects anything you do to the north, just speeds people to a point where they're not going to go anywhere. So that seems like a critical thing to deal with as part of any plan. I mean, otherwise, you're not going to gain what you need to gain. And you have to deal with what happens when you get off either the Beltway or I-270, because, despite some, efforts to double load the exit ramps in places, the lines seem to back up as far as they did before. And our problem is if we can't get the roads flowing in any way in the interior of the county, or like at least off the highways, then you're just, again, speeding people to a point from which they will not be able to make any kind of progress. And so it would be good if they were looking at this holistically and recognizing that you kind of got to start from your choke points and figure out how do you deal with them and work backwards upstream rather than starting upstream and leaving your choke points in place. And I feel that they've got to take a broader look at this, and I hope the state looks at just adding the lane on I-270 right now. You can't do it on the Beltway, at least not beyond the rail bridge. And at that point, there's not enough room to add anything. But before the rail bridge, there's actually room to probably grab enough space to add a lane on the interior. And the bridges are a problem. The bridges are a problem on I-270, where any of these widenings would pretty much require you to take out existing bridges. They're rebuilding the Surrender, or the bridge next to Surrender Dorothy, or Surrender whoever is being surrendered right now. And that bridge they're rebuilding is right up to the service lane, and so you couldn't put anything under that. And here they are talking about a mega project and redesigning a bridge that they would have to then tear out and do over again. And the CSX bridge is a whole other problem, because that's not going to be quick, and how long are you going to disrupt East Coast traffic on the Mark Line, wherever else it does, while you deal with that. It seems really poorly thought out. It does seem very political. A nice thing to roll out now, but not really effective. So, I hope we'd continue to raise issues about other things that matter, and hopefully get a governor that'll take a holistic approach at what we're dealing with here. Because I share a lot of people's concerns that this will just move backups from one place to another, but not necessarily make any improvement. Now, I understand that along Rock Creek, through the famous S-turns, that there were limits on how far, going back to when the Beltway was built, how far you could go over there. Do we know what was originally agreed to? What are the limits of how far we can go? Yeah, how wide?
Matt Harper with Montgomery County Parks. We had dug up some old agreements with when the Beltway was originally built, and they said it wouldn't expand beyond one or two more additional lanes, and we've already surpassed that. So that's already out of date, and that's the agreement that we currently
So
hold.
we're at the limit of what they could have done by the agreement.
According to this agreement, but I think we've exceeded it already. So I'm not sure how relevant it is at this point, but clearly there's no room in a lot of places to go any further without actually ending up on top of the river.
Yeah, I don't see how through parts of that you get away without having really serious stream impacts. And if to the extent we've got a legal hook, we ought to try to look at the legal hook, not just you can't expand beyond, but what were the reasons that you couldn't expand beyond? Because if they delineate what the purpose of the limits is, at least it gives us something to say you're violating the purpose of the limits.
Right, and many portions of the existing beltway are still actually deeded to MNC-PPC. So they were never actually transferred over to SHA right-of-way, so they are officially under, MNC-PPC property ownership.
Gee, how strong is that ownership?
Okay, so that was one of the, when we talk about roles,
Yeah.
my take, and I've actually confronted the state representatives about this, is the reason that Park and Planning is listed as a cooperating agency, which is a level above a participating agency, is because of our land ownership. Although we're listed as a local agency, as you all know, we've told you over and over, we're a state agency. So what that means is that they don't have the same power of eminent domain against property owned by Park and Planning that they do against property owned either by the local government or private individuals. So there's been a question whether they have any rights of eminent domain. We've done the analysis of it, and we're looking at it, and that's one of the likely reasons, so that they're going to need our cooperation in acquiring any of that property. So it's not as simple as we need this parkland, we're going to take it. It's not going to happen that way. So that's our leverage, and we use that actually successfully in the ICC when the state didn't want to do all of the mitigation that we were asking them, because the county's mitigation requirements are different. We're stricter than the state's on forest conservation. So we actually held up the deed until they complied with the restrictions with the replacement of parkland that we wanted. So that's our leverage. We believe that's the reason that we're a participating agency. But I just want to make, if it hasn't been, hammered in, we are collaborating very closely with DOT. We're collaborating very close, actually, with National Capital Park and Planning, because a lot of the property they need is covered by Capra Crampton, which means they need federal approval to have a change in use. So there's a lot of very, very difficult legal reasons that it's not going to be as simple as just saying we need this and we're going to take it. So, and we're incorporating theirs into our comments. So essentially, it makes MCDOT a cooperating agency in that regard.
That would be a good time not to cooperate then. I mean,
Well, we don't really like that term, but I just want to make it clear that what that means is we have a choice of concurring with comment, which means a concurrence with comment. If we basically say we oppose it, we're not going to concur, we lose our ability to get any of our comments into the record of decision. If we concur with comment, then our comments make their way into the record of decision. So it basically says we don't agree with this. And what that does is it basically puts on the table for the partnership, for the concessionaire, they can't ignore it. They can't say, oh, we didn't know that you were going to require this. It's in the record of decision. So essentially, we really need to get to a concurrence with comment at some point. We have a meeting with Federal Highway at the end of the month because they're really pushing for us to get there. So if we end up with concurrence with comments, that doesn't mean that we agree. It means that, all right, we can move forward, but on to the next process under NEPA, but you have to put these positions into the record of decision so that they're addressed at some point moving forward.
do you retain the right, say at the end, to ultimately not give them deed to property that's owned by the parks then? Do you surrender that if you concur?
No, it's a completely separate question.
So if you don't get a solution that sufficiently protects the stream, then you have the ability to say,
You're not getting our
You're not
land,
getting
and
our
it's
land.
it would be a rather lengthy legal process for them to force us to turn the land over or to try to condemn it. There's a couple legal issues in there, and I really don't want to talk about that.
right,
But I think the reality is that, we're sort of going down the adversarial path here. The reality, I think we all acknowledge, is there's a problem of traffic on these roads, and there should be a holistic evaluation of how to solve that problem. And I think that, I'm hoping that we are not going to enter into this just, the folks who say no, 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 but that we are basically going to be saying, have you looked at multimodal solutions? Have you looked at other uses of the existing paving? Have you figured out some ways to improve the traffic situation, yet not have devastating environmental and community impacts? So I don't want to,
right.
derail the conversation that you were having, but I do think, we're trying to go into this and say it's not just as adversaries. Let's see if there's a way to turn this project into something that will find some solutions.
Yeah, it seems to me that I-270 offers an easy way for us to say yes to additional traffic solutions without yes to widening. Because if they do the reversibles, we can accomplish that within what's there without having to do widening. And I think ultimately people, what they really want is the traffic solution. They don't particularly care if the thing's widened, and lots of people do care if the thing is widened. And I think for all of us, I mean, I've been reminded of this and having commented on this with people, not supporting widening is not supporting the solutions that we know we can implement that are actually, I think cheaper to implement. So I hope that that we all kind of remember to say both things, because that's important. I don't want to engender people thinking we don't want a solution to the I-270 mess. I want to say one other thing about the transit, and then I see you wanted to make a comment. If this were going through a city, if I-270 was going through a city or the Beltway was going through a city, you can make a stronger case for mass transit option. But a mass transit option that is either under or on the Beltway doesn't stop at places that facilitate actually picking up passengers, which the whole point of the transit option would be to take people off the Beltway. So the transit option may not be as simple as saying, let's just put something up the middle of I-270 or let's put something on the side lane. You may actually have to look at where are the people coming from to get onto I-270 and intercepting them before they get there as part of a transit solution, rather than just looking at, can I put it on the I-270 roadway? And I think the state should be reminded that the solution may lie elsewhere to the problem they're trying to do in reducing ridership on I-270.
Thanks. Chris, did you want to respond?
I don't want to interrupt your conversation, but I have comments to make
Yeah.
whenever it's appropriate. I just wanted to reinforce the importance of making the right comments at the right time in this process, and that's what we've been collaborating with the commission on. And right now, the documents that are ripe for decision-making are the purpose and need. And the efforts that have been made by the county and the commission on that is to make sure that that purpose and need is broader than what's been framed by the state, which is purely around the highway need. And it's not questioning the highway need, but it's suggesting that the range of solutions needs to be broader than that. The other element that is really on top of mind for where this process will go are the screening criteria. And again, I don't know if I don't think the commission has submitted their formal comments yet or not, but it's really important that those criteria be balanced and include some things that are missing from the state's preliminary assessment of that, related to social equity and how different types of alternatives will be evaluated in those. For example, on Homeland Security, we had suggested that facility redundancy might be an important criteria for them to consider in screening alternatives for that. And I did want to mention, we are working closely with both Prince George's County DOT and sharing our comments and the commission, and we have engaged, the city of Rockville has asked us to engage with them, and as we have not with Gaithersburg, given that those study limits are not in Gaithersburg at this time, really. But we're happy to come to talk to you about the comments that we're submitting through this process, although they don't necessarily carry the same weight as those the commission has.
To that point, and then we'll keep moving with council members, the initiation of this discussion today was substantially to establish that we want to have a unified voice here, and the county council would like to, be able to weigh in, to put it gently, as to what the comments are. So what's the process for that? Maybe, Glenn, can I ask you to help us understand, how does the council kind of establish what the county's position ultimately is?
Well, we could ask that Park and Planning and DOT share their draft comments with us. They have sort of a long way anyway. We can share amongst you all, and whether it's formal or informal, pass on those comments back to them. The comments really have to come from Park and Planning.
Right.
Because they're the agency that has to concur. I mean, comments can come from DOT as well, but it's stronger if it comes from Park and Planning.
It's our intention to always submit our own comments, given that we're a participating agency, and they're likely to
You will
be-
submit as your
Yeah.
participating agency role, and Park and
Exactly.
Planning has its, what was the name of the?
It's a cooperating agency.
Cooperating
But
agency
we are actually
voice.
incorporating, as I say, we are incorporating DOT's
Sure.
comments into ours.
So we just want to be
So
sure
that
that
gives them,
we are incorporating
Yes.
ours as well, so
we'll
I
have
think
to,
we're
I'll
all,
work with Glenn, we'll work with Glenn
yeah.
and figure out a process
Because
for
we could-
that.
Yeah, exactly. Let's work it out. But whatever we get as draft comments, we could circulate and get your comments.
terrific.
Informally. I don't know if we have, I sort of agree with Mr. Elrich. I don't know if we have to have meetings on every point you have to make a comment on something. You will need to have, the body will need to meet in late January, February, to talk about the ARDS though, because that's a major decision point.
Talk about
The alternatives retained for detailed study.
Right.
Whether you agree
The,
with those
the
or not.
purpose and need comments are significantly overdue. As I said, we have a meeting already set up with Federal Highway and the state highway agencies to try to reach a conclusion on, they've had our comments, they promised to get responses back to us this week so that we can evaluate them and come to the table, kind of come to a conclusion of where we can agree, where we can't agree, And then the idea was that we were going to come back with that, and they say, well, let's see how far we can get on what would be a staff recommendation to the commission. The question is how we get, in a timing perspective, how we get that, the council's kind of into that same process. So if we can we'll work through Glenn to make sure that that happens, because of course we don't want to agree on something that would be contrary to what the position that this council would have. But if we have a comment that is not being addressed and that we're saying, okay, this is something that we're not agreeing on, but it should be in the ARDS so that in the record of decision, so that it's clear to the concessionaire moving forward to the next step, then I think we're in a good position.
Okay. Mr. Hucker.
Thank you. So just to spell it out for people watching at home, you won't send any comments on either the screening criteria or the purpose and need to the state without our input
No, we've already done that, actually. We've sent all of our
in
comments
the future.
on both, but with regard to the ARDS, we can coordinate and make sure that happens.
That would be great. Great.
Yes.
Great. Thanks.
Can I say the marked up comments from Park and Planning are in the packet?
packet.
You see, what you see there is purpose and need that was put out by the state, and then the redlining are the comments that Park and Planning has added to it. And earlier in the memo, you see a memo from Chris basically saying what the purpose and need comments from DOT are, and
Right.
they're all pretty consistent with.
Right.
Yes,
No.
and we also sent, there's a cover memo that outlines the major problems, so that, they're looking at it from a 30,000, from 20,000, and then right on the ground. We promised them red line, so they could put it right into the document, hopefully that they'll do that. But some of the comments can't be addressed that way, because we're basically saying that some of their studies were deficient, some of their analysis is deficient. So you don't, so
Sure.
that's gonna end up being a comment that we're gonna have to put in the record of decision.
Right. No, I appreciate that, and I agree with Mr. Conklin's assessment that those are the two areas of engagement for this council, and I really want us to be on the same page going forward. Dr. Orland, since you mentioned the council's limited role in this whole process at the beginning of your comments and the standing Park and Planning has as a cooperating agency, let me just ask, did we invite our State House and Senate delegation to this briefing at all?
No, I did not.
And what about our state government relations staff?
They know this is happening, but I didn't specifically invite them, no. I knew we'd, I knew we'd run over, and we haven't even gotten to their comments yet. So the more people, sometimes it'll
Sure.
take more time, so.
Well, not everybody, I want them to be apprised of all these
Sure.
and have a forum to get their questions answered. I mean, to me, obviously the chair of our T&E committee, the House of Delegates, and many members are from this county. We have a whole committee that oversees park and planning, and we have very talented people involved, and I think, and they have limited staff. They won't meet again formally until January. We have outstanding staff working on this. I think it's really important for us to all work as a team going forward and get them really prepared to, and aligned with us and prepared to articulate, to use all the levers of power that they have and articulate the Montgomery County outlook on this as we approach the General Assembly.
Right.
In 2019. So, I know this is an inconvenient time for most of them at 9:45 in the morning on a Tuesday, but we could schedule an additional briefing on this where they could get their questions answered and we could all get aligned, especially in advance of the comments that an agency that they regulate will be submitting.
If
That's
I
my
could
second.
also comment that, as Gwen indicated earlier, we're also coordinating very closely with Prince George's County, because we're a bi-county agency.
Sure.
So we have my counterpart in Prince George's County who's coordinating with their planning department, their parks department, and they're briefing we're briefing the full commission, and they're keeping their delegation. So they're running a parallel course, so we have power in numbers. It's not just Montgomery County.
Agreed.
It's Prince George's, and it seems that most of our general statements, although our land use planning's a little bit different, or our land uses are a little different, the overall concerns that we have is consistent between the two counties.
Absolutely. And so I think we're on the same page. We should get them in the arena and engage with us, and I'm sure many of them already feel like they are, but if I were them, I'd be concerned about us having a briefing and getting these questions answered at a time when either, it's inconvenient for them and they're not invited to it. Let me return to a topic Ms. Florine opened up and we've commented on. I appreciate the fact that Secretary Ron came here and spoke to the committee months ago and said there won't be any details for a long time, and I appreciate the fact that he said we're going to bring in the best minds of the country to look at this vexing problem. But that only goes so far. They obviously, whatever solution the best minds come up with, they have to conform to federal interstate standards and to Newtonian physics, really. And I can't figure out where 4 at-grade lanes go in the current right-of-way, which is the promise of this whole proposal, right? So if the governor has recently promised to not take houses and other private properties, to me it's not very comforting to me or my constituents just to say, we'll know more details in February, so sit tight. So Dr. Orland, what's the width of the current right-of-way on 495?
The width of the right-of-way west of the 270 west spur is 300 feet. The width of the right-of-way east of there is generally about 200 feet.
Around 200. And I know what this has been, I've seen some debate on this. Can you point us to the document you're looking at so that any members of the public can refer to the same thing?
Just look at property maps. Look at tax maps that, like the Board of Appeals has a set of tax maps which shows where the boundary of the right-of-way is, and it shows 300 feet for the western section and 200 feet for the rest, generally speaking. It flares out at certain places at interchanges and such.
If you could maybe send us all a link, or we could publicize a map for the public to look at, I think that would be really...
I'll see what I can do.
Because there are a lot of people worried about this topic. So are there homes or private property within the existing right-of-way?
No. Within the existing right-of-way, no. Not that I know of.
No, and we have it on our GIS, so it's available on our website to see through our GIS system what the existing right-of-way is, and we could, we could overlay anything if we can always add a layer if we need to. So, but there is on our website, through our website, you can see what the boundaries of of both highways are.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
I mean, 12-foot lanes, and there were 8. There are 12 lanes. That's 144 feet. Plus, you have to add the dividers between each of the sections of roadways. Plus, you have to have some area beyond the edge of the right-of-way. And, of course, at interchanges, you have ramps. So, is it possible to fit 12 lanes within 200 feet? Very, very doubtful. I mean, if it's to happen at all, it would be a situation where you have retaining walls right at the boundary line, and you're building balls to the wall all the way out to those walls. Constructability, I think, would be almost impossible. I mean, you talk about replacing, Mr. Elrich mentioned replacing all the bridges. You have to replace the ramps. You have to, there's, where the connecting points are going to be are key. I think it doesn't seem plausible to be able to add that many lanes on 495. 270 is a little bit different. The right-of-way is wider and in some sections, and as we pointed out, north of 370, it's really still be very expensive, but it still would be possible to certainly add 2 lanes. This why I got the floor. In terms of Mr. Elrich, the idea of taking away the inside shoulder, it's got pros and cons. A lot of places have done it. A con is that it's a breakdown lane. If a car breaks down, they can go there. And also, that's where the police enforce the HOV as they pull people into that lane. So, but it may be still worth it, maybe better overall to actually use that lane as a travel lane. But it's got pros and cons. That's all I was saying.
You can't do everything in your solution as a traffic solution.
Right. And Virginia for years has taken the shoulder away and used it for a travel lane, and again, has its cons.
We've raised this in committee, and I know you've been in touch with State Highway about that. And certainly there are trade-offs in terms of public safety. There's no HOV enforcement on the Beltway right now that you need to worry about, and the use of the left service lane, to me makes sense. But I think clarifying where the right-of-way is and the GIS map would go a long way toward relieving some public anxiety. And then hopefully the governor will be true to his promise that we'll stay within the existing right-of-way. But my final question, Dr. Orland, is It was my understanding that part of the right-of-way around Silver Spring near Four Corners is as low as 180 feet.
It's possible. I mean, my recollection is it's generally 200, but it could be less than that in certain, I haven't looked at
Well,
every little
so, yeah,
piece.
obviously, there's a need to clarify that. Mr. Conklin, do you have something?
Yeah,
to-
just the construct of how the state will go about doing that. They're going to take the screening criteria, and the most infeasible alternatives will drop
Sure.
through that. So that'll give constituents some comfort. And then exactly the issues you and Dr. Owen are exploring will be what happens with the design evaluation of the alternatives retained for detailed study. So the timeline's longer
But
than
not
you
for
would
months
want,
from
but
now.
I don't think it's, I don't think it's going to be forever until they know the most largest alternatives may not work in these sections.
Okay, thank you.
All right, Council Vice President Navarro.
Thank you. I really appreciate, scheduling this briefing as a full council briefing, because there is no doubt that this is going to be an ongoing issue, even beyond the general election, of great interest to our constituents. And so to that effect, I think it would be really useful to incorporate perhaps a link in our own website with some, describing really this process. I mean, there's just so much going on out there in social media, so much discussion, so much misinformation, a lot of anxiety that's happening right now. And right here, I think we have clarified quite a number of very key, important issues. I would say that it's very interesting that this governor is, going around making these statements, when in reality, you're peeling back the onion and realize that, there are a lot of very important components missing, such as this notion of the study of county. And so you can't say in one breath that you're so pro-economic development and pro-business and pro-private sector and quality of life when you are making decisions such as that. And so it is up to us to really be able to communicate a coherent message to our constituents. And I'm not sure that that has, happened thus far. It's also clear that, this council going back decades has thought through a lot of these components. I mean, it is incorporated in a lot of our master plans. So I think that's also important, and perhaps it will give our constituents a little bit of, comfort to know that we have thought through a lot of these elements. But also appreciate the fact that, park and planning is thinking outside the box and really not just staying within, some parameters. That I think it's also hopefully will be a comfort. So I'm just requesting that, we try to find a convenient place where the public can go to, and even us as council members and our staff, in case we get questions, it would be great to just send a link or something to that effect. And then B, Mr. Orland, if you could also draft, some type of a timeline. I know we have the NEPA process here, but one that really does fit with reality, so that as we move forward, after the general election, new council comes in, et cetera, we can hit the ground running in scheduling briefings so that everybody can, be on the same page. I think that would be really, really useful. So once again, just really appreciate this. I think it has really shined a lot of lights, and I do like the fact that park and planning does have some leverage in this process, and I don't think it's about, being conflictive in any way, but it is important to recognize that there is that piece, which hopefully then gives us more and more opportunities to chime in. So thank you, everybody.
Yeah.
If I can add, again, on Part B, this is the slide which has the process. The alternatives retained for detailed study, we should really, are likely to have those from the state for consideration, for comment, by early 2019,
Right.
late January, early February. And that is going to be a major decision point in this
Yeah.
study. And then after that, the draft environmental impact statement would follow about a year later. And
I think-
public hearings then.
Yeah,
Mr.
so,
Navarro's made.
no, what I was referring to, I think this is a great chart, but obviously, at least for me, after this conversation, it's clear that we should have almost like an annotated chart to fully understand.
Well, like a public-facing
Yeah.
webpage. Let's
Yeah,
have
no,
DOT
totally.
produce something,
But
I
also
think.
kind of annotated, because it doesn't seem to, this seems kind of general, but, anyway, yeah.
You can discuss amongst yourselves who should publish such a resource, but it seems like there should
It'd
be
be
a
great to have
resource
something, yeah.
for the residents of the county so that they can come and have a very plain explanation of
We
what the
have a-
process is and
We
where
have a
we're at.
webpage set up already,
Okay.
and a lot of it links to the state, but it provides, as the basic information that we can. And when someone has comment, I ask them to comment just both to us, but also to provide it to the state. So,
And we'll look at adding
yeah.
some things to the
You-
website to have a very clear,
Bring-
user-friendly kind of timeline.
Yeah, no, because, I mean, again, I feel that through this conversation, we have clarified quite a number of things that I had not necessarily seen in any of the websites or, this general chart. So I think the public definitely appreciates some of the nuances that perhaps are not as, evident. So to the extent that that can be looked at, that would be super useful. Thank you.
All right, now we will turn to Park and Planning and DOT for a summary of important points that you may wish to add.
Sure. As I mentioned earlier, DOT has submitted 2 comment letters in addition to participating in the interagency working group. The first of those concerned the purpose and need, and our comments were really about broadening the purpose to address mobility needs in this quarter, knowing that the highway congestion is a symptom of the unmet mobility needs that we have. To make sure that the purpose and need protects the existing HOV and transit opportunities that exist in this corridor, and to make sure that other options for transit are fully considered. You get some sense from the numbering of alternatives how the transit is viewed, and we want to make sure that it gets its full consideration. And again, the last item that we really referenced in the purpose and need letter formally was the expansion of the study area back to I-70 as had originally been announced, knowing that the needs north of 370 are just as pronounced as those south of 370. The second letter we submitted was on the preliminary range of alternatives and the screening criteria. And in that, the state, through the interagency working group, had suggested that they welcomed input on what might constitute the actual transit alternatives. So we gave them lots of ideas of what could be part of Alternative 14, heavy rail transit, light rail transit, and BRT. Many of those are projects that are familiar to you, like expanding MARC service to all-day service in the third track, some metro rail extensions for consideration. They may not make it through the screening process, given the cost and the limited market they might serve in addition to Shady Grove, but they need to look at those. Light rail alternatives that were 355-oriented light rail, and then other ones that were extensions of the Purple Line, which other plans have thought about, both to Virginia and east into Prince George's County. And then BRT alternatives, given the limits, we did not include the CCT in our first recommendation for BRT alternatives, since that is largely north of I-370, but did include the 355 BRT, the 586, 193 BRT corridor, the Randolph Road North Bethesda corridor, and then some alternatives for BRT that are beyond the immediate county master plan, Tyson's Corner and elsewhere.
Yeah, your letter is on page 62,
It
circle
is.
62 of the packet.
And I'm trying not to just read it to you in the interest of time. We had suggested that, as others have said, there has not really been an analysis of what through regional travel is compared to local travel. And the state had investigated improvements to US 301 and I-97 as a bypass to the Washington region in the past. There's another possibility with work Virginia counties have been doing on Tri-County Parkway and extending that to US 15, which might also serve that purpose on the west. And then we made a large number of comments on the screening criteria, because this is really what will determine the alternatives retained for detailed study. Some of those were engineering, again, to move from car throughput to person throughput analysis, and accessibility to jobs and opportunity is some of those evaluation criteria. Elements related to safety, which is not directly addressed in the screening criteria, purpose and need. Facility redundancy, as I mentioned earlier. And we had suggested that or asked the state whether they only intend to consider toll-generated revenue to support these alternatives, or whether other possible revenue tools are available, so that some of the alternatives you've seen that aren't generating revenue might have a fair chance of surviving. And then the most important item we thought was missing in the environmental criteria was measures related to social equity and fairness, and how any toll schemes or other priced schemes might impact different economic groups within the county and elsewhere in their ability to use these facilities. And then lastly, as we've talked with the planning department, and as you've heard today, the characteristics of these corridors are not at all uniform. The elements in Prince George's County are very different from those in northern Montgomery County, which are very different from western Montgomery County, which is very different from 270. So we had suggested analysis segments that the state looked to see whether different solutions out of that wide range of alternatives would work in different pieces and not try to cram the same solution through all of the two corridors, knowing that the constraints are very different and the needs are very different. So that's the summary of the comments that we provided. We shared them, as I mentioned, with Prince George's County government, with the planning staff and a few other stakeholders, and are happy to include county council on any other comments we develop in the future. However, I must say we will submit them within the comment deadlines, independent of what process we need to go through, and we can amend them later, but we want to make sure that whatever we have to say is on the record in a timely way so that
When is
they're not
that?
ignored. They're different for each step of this process. So the purpose and need, I think the first two steps, the comment deadlines, have just closed.
And that's what this letter is right here.
Yeah, that's what these two letters refer to.
Thank you.
Okay, and the comments, parking planning, I'm going to turn it over to both Steve Aldrich, is one of our transportation planners, as well as Matt.
One moment, Councilmember Florine.
Okay.
I just wanted to compliment you, Mr. Conklin, on emphasizing the additional alternatives issue, the Route 301 and the Route 15 issues. I mean, that addresses the big problem, which Ms. Rubin alluded to at the get-go, which was the destination and well, however you characterize that. The Washington region is one of the few regions, if not the only region in the country, that only has one road going around it. And I think that's the problem that we're trying to solve. Most other jurisdictions have an alternative serious option for people trying to get around that major jurisdiction. So I just wanted to say thank you for raising this. I think the state really needs to start focusing on this long term. I remember going to meetings about this years ago when I was on the planning board, and of course, you know, there's always an issue somewhere. But at the end of the day, looking at 301 and Route 15 as alternative routes, beefing them up, and making that clear to the members of the traveling regional public would be a big advantage for everyone. So thanks for doing that.
Mr. Rice.
So again, I want to just reiterate that we have our Montgomery County Department of Transportation saying that our #1 priority for bus rapid transit, which is Corridor City Transitway, is not being transmitted to the state because the state and the governor have set limits saying that we're not going to consider anything north of 370.
That and the project already has its own NEPA standing, so those were the two components.
Set by whom?
The state MTA has been advancing that project. It's not concluded, as you well know.
Exactly.
It has its own course.
And so, again, I just want to be very clear about this because it's incredibly important that you have a huge swath that I represent who are not being served by this proposal, who are being left out and said that you don't count, you don't matter. So I just want to be very clear about this. And again, my frustration, Mr. Conklin, you know is not with you. I know where DOT stands altogether, but I want to make sure that the public, my voters, my constituents in my district know that what this governor is doing is wrong. They are pushing us aside and saying we don't matter. And I'm sick and tired of it.
And thank you, Mr. Rice. And to follow that along, we sent a letter, strongly worded, from the county executives and the council presidents of Montgomery and Frederick. And we were in agreement, our two county structures, that this study should go all the way and that it should be multimodal. And those are two major issues. And it's a shock that the governor would consider breaking this into two pieces and letting the second piece, you know, just dwindle. So we need to get that back on track. Ms. Rubin.
Okay, I've had a lot of roles, but I haven't had time to get my engineering degree or my transportation planning degree in the interim. So I'm going to turn over the comments, the technical comments that we've made, similar to what Mr. Conklin indicated, to both Steve Aldrich, who is our one of the transportation planners, and an engineer working from the planning department working on this, as well as Matt Harper, who is from the Parks Department, so that you understand the issues that they're focusing on as far as for the purpose and need. So, Steve.
Great. One thing I want to mention is that we have an awful lot of people working on this project, and as Carol mentioned, we are retaining a NEPA consultant to help us in that area. But certainly, what we've been focusing on recently has been trying to define the problem, essentially for the problem and the need. The purpose and need statement is a critical part of the NEPA process. We have some major problems with the way the problem was framed. Even just the title of the project, Managed Lane Study, most transportation studies start with a problem like congestion. The overarching title from the governor, the Congestion Relief Program, would have been a better title for this project because it's already, the title is somewhat leading. So you sort of get the sense that multimodal solutions may be off the table or may be excluded very quickly. So what we focus very carefully is trying to make sure that metrics that look at quantifiable objectives, look at multimodalism, are included in the purpose and need document, because if it's not in that document, it won't be considered when you screen the alternatives and when you look at developing the arts. The four main efforts that we identified, first was taking managed lanes and reference to it out of the purpose and need document and really focusing on quantifying the need. Where is the congestion? How often does it occur? Where does it occur? What are the causes of it? And how systemic is it on both roads? Certainly tying in the origin and destinations to these problems. What's causing this congestion? All of those, that a lot of data needs to go into it, but that helps to possibly define a solution. And the solution, as Mr. Eldridge said, may not be along the corridor, maybe someplace else. So until you actually look at this comprehensively and regionally, you can't really screen accurately what the proper solution should be. So we've identified the need for certainly more robust and measurable objectives, much more detailed analysis of the congestion. We will point out that during the ICC, we had some very detailed metrics, things like number of hours of congestion resolved. And right now, we're just not there with the way the objectives that they're looking to screen are very general. And that just doesn't work and give us the information that we need to make adequate decisions. And the last of the four, I guess, overarching needs was that this project needs to look at things from an equity perspective. We need to make sure that we're looking at all our citizens and certainly looking not just at providing a lane for people who can afford it, but maybe we need to look at person throughput. Maybe we look at person served to make sure that the transportation investments are serving all our citizens.
Jay?
All right. Did you have something to add? Is that another presentation, or?
No, Jay Cole's going to speak from the Parks Department.
From the Parks Department, we focus on two major comments. The first, and for the record, we did work with SHA, and they have concurred on a lot of our comments, but we have two major sticking points from Parks' perspective. We've learned a lot from the ICC and the Purple Line and other projects coming through, so we're trying not to revisit past errors. The first was to have environmental stewardship shown as a distinct need in the purpose and need, as it was for the ICC. We ended up leveraging both the park's ownership of land and that environmental stewardship as a need into a significant environmental stewardship and compensatory mitigation package that we would like to ensure it is included in here. More important, because this is likely going to be a public-private partnership, so whatever's in the ROD, we need to make sure that whoever comes in as the partner knows that that's a distinct need. The other one is about stormwater management. The Beltway has approximately 631 acres of impervious surface, and I would say 90% of it is untreated. Currently, they have not committed to treating the existing stormwater management on the Beltway, which is a significant issue for parks, owning the stream valleys that it traverses. Just for reference, 630 acres is more acreage than Parks has impervious surface in our entire Parks Department, and we have our own NPDS permit. The significance of that is if it was built and permitted, then SHA, per their MS4 permit, that would be considered treated to the MEP. So they would never come back and put significant money into treating those stormwater management, those facilities. So that's an important process for us. We made that mistake with the Purple Line, and the Purple Line's deal or permit with MDE was that anything considered subbase that went down to the subbase was considered not new development. So there are areas that the tracks are actually on that aren't required to be treated. So you take a sidewalk off and there's subbase to it, it's not considered new development. So we kind of learned from that experience once they came in. So it's only significant widening. So we want to make sure that that's included also in the purpose and need.
Very good. Well, thank you very much. Appreciate the presentations that we've had today. This has been a very helpful conversation. We've got a lot of work ahead of us on this important issue, and we will continue to address it going forward. So thank you. We are now going to move to the next item on our agenda.
A point of personal privilege, could you add me as supporting the consent calendar?
Supporting the
Vote
consent
earlier.
calendar, certainly.
Thank you.
And
Mr. President, for me as well, for the minutes and for the consent calendar, I'd like to be included in the affirmative.
all right, duly noted. Okay, now, we have an item that is coming back to us. Hopefully the last time. Well, right. This is a straw vote discussion. This has been through committee, it's been through the council, and we'll have a straw vote discussion today, planning a final vote next week. So I'm going to not belabor this and turn it to Keith Levchenko, ask him to please walk through the committee recommendations and any pertinent information, and then we'll have discussion on those recommendations.
All right. The committee met, the T&E committee met on July 16th, and I've tried to summarize.
Keith, one moment. Let me ask the chair to, I was trying to save him the chance, but he wants to.
I know all my colleagues are so eager to have this conversation. We have spent more time on this issue than I think I can imagine spending. And it has been, really, I cannot. So this is fundamentally about whether or not we will have surveys in areas of our county that we have said we should not have sewer, we should have septic. And we've set them off as saying, these are areas that fundamentally will be served by septic. And then the question arises, are there circumstances that we should look at allowing people to have sewer as opposed to septic? And what triggers that? And for 20 years now, we've had a survey process that has been allowed to go forward. In some cases that have been triggered not by any failure, but just by a desire not to have septic and to go forward with a survey that would allow for a recommendation from the executive branch that would then be reviewed by the council with respect to possible sewer. We took this issue up as a full council, and we basically concluded, at least I will characterize it, is that we don't want the survey. We don't want a survey. What we want is something that if there's not a documented failure, we don't want a survey process. And that passed by a 5-4 vote. And the county executive then sent us a memo saying, really, would you please reconsider that? And we had the conversation, and it was generally agreed that we would reconsider that and see if we could find common ground, if you will, a different approach. And the president of the council sent this back to my committee, which I did not relish, to see whether or not we could come up with another approach that would be closer to what the executive branch had sought and a true compromise with the concerns that had been expressed by 5 of us with respect to this process. And the fundamental concern that many of us had is what does trigger the survey? And the committee looked at that anew and said, what should trigger it is, there's a real problem here. We didn't want DEP actually to do that analysis, because that's not what DEP does. We have an agency, DPS, that actually is quite expert with respect to that. And so we said to ourselves, why don't we have DPS basically affirm that there's a problem here? And if there's a problem here, then we would allow the survey to go forward in the manner in which it has historically. But it must be triggered by something that really is a verifiable problem. We worked on this at the committee level and concluded that's a reasonable approach to trying to solve this issue. And it's my understanding that the executive branch agrees and concludes that the committee's recommendation is appropriate and one that they can support. This is art, not science. People have different points of view. I tried my best to reconcile those differing points of view, and I stand by the committee's recommendation. Mr. Lachenko?
Yeah, just to clarify a few points, and there were also some additional recommendations in the memo that in the committee memo that before the committee in July that the committee did not have time to get to, that I think we do need to also talk about today. I think they're consistent with the committee discussion, but they weren't actually formally discussed. So we do want to get to those as well. The other clarifying point I will note with regard to your comments about the triggering of the survey, and I've got some discussion of it in the packet. Because we are talking about a more restrictive process in the current process, staff did feel we needed to clarify whether we're talking about surveys that would occur for properties inside the established service envelopes versus outside the established service envelopes. So that is something we definitely want to make sure we also make sure council members understand that issue today as well. Councilmember Elrich has brought that issue up a couple of times as well, including in a memo that he sent out yesterday. So we do want to make sure we talk about that. And also, I think a key distinction between the language that I've prepared today in response to the committee's recommendation in July and where the council was last spring that you had referenced is beyond just the triggering of the survey. That's obviously a major change from the current policy, requiring a documented failure or major problem, as you noted. Is what about the other properties in the survey area? In the amendment that the council initially supported through straw vote early this spring, the concept was that all of the properties had to have a failure or major problem in order to be considered within that survey process. But under the committee's recommendation, the way I've drafted the language, the way I understand the committee was moving, was, as you noted, it's a trigger that you have to have a documented failure or problem. But then the discretion goes to DEP and DPS to work through their survey process as they currently do and develop recommendations for the executive to transmit to the council. In those circumstances, not all of the properties that may fall in that survey area would have documented problems or failures. There may be other reasons why they're included, and we can get into that as well. But that's also a major distinction between what the council had initially discussed in the spring and what's before the council today based on the committee recommendation.
What the council had done by a 5-4 vote essentially was eliminate the survey possibility, because you are automatically entitled to sewer consideration if you have a failure. And so that fundamentally was on a 5-4 vote basically saying, we don't want a survey. We want simply failure to be the only consideration. And now we are reconsidering that piece at the request of the county executive. Is that a fair characterization?
Yeah, correct. That's the way I interpret it as well. So unless there are other general questions, we can walk through the packet as I laid it out, and certainly.
Just to follow up on Rogers, I mean, I really thought, I mean, the survey and the conditions for being able to get a sewer are two different things, right? You don't need a survey. I mean, your point is you don't need a survey to deal with the problem. And my question is, I thought we had had a really good discussion about the different things that could be done to determine that a person's system is likely to fail. I don't know if you can anticipate it, but there's likely, and I don't know whether near term, there's no definition of near term, so I don't know how you get there. But I don't see the reflection of the kind of things that you would do to determine that this property is going to have a problem in here. You seem to resort to a failure or vague language again, and it seems to me that I thought we were going to include a range of tools that you could use so that you would make a decision. I have no problem with making a decision that this system is going south. I'm not trying to avoid that decision, and we all agree we don't want to bring this to the point of failure, because that's ugly. But we need to have, like, real definition of, I feel, of the things you're going to use to determine that a system, really doesn't have much life left in it. And I don't feel you adequately addressed that in here.
Well, I think the requirement that a property be documented by DPS as having a failure or major problem is described, I think, with some detail on Circle 38 of Circle 38 of the memo, which has that language, and it talks about DPS must determine that the on-site system failure cannot be addressed reasonably by using a conventional replacement system, by innovative and alternative on-site replacement systems, or by new technologies. And some of that language actually was also in the earlier amendment that the council had looked at. So I think with regard to the trigger, I think it's pretty specific. I think the issue where we were relying on DPS and DEP's professional judgment going forward from the committee recommendation is with how the survey plays out after that. After you've initiated the survey, what properties are included, why are they included, what are the conditions on those properties, what recommendation does DEP and the executive ultimately make on those properties. That is still, under this recommendation, that discretion is provided to the executive to make the recommendation and ultimately to the council to decide on a case-by-case basis. It doesn't say that every property has to have failed in order to be approved in the end, but it also doesn't say the council can't do that in certain circumstances if it feels that that bar should be higher in that particular case for other reasons. So that was purposely left to the professional judgment of DEP and DPS to develop the survey and leave that to move to recommendations and approval. So what we don't have in this language, and I think that's what Mr. Ulrich was looking for, was what would lead the executive or the council to approve in certain cases or deny in certain cases within that survey area. We don't have that in this language because we struggled trying to get to that kind of definition in advance of a particular case in front of us. So that was the difficulty we had with that. We did try to get very specific with what triggers it. And it is important to note that if you have that trigger and you have a case in front of you that has a problem, you very likely are going to try to find a way to sewer that property. Well, if you're sewering that property, that means it's going to be coming into the area. And what is the best way to serve that property in the context of what's around it? And without doing a survey, you don't know.
But that's not what was said at the last meeting, because even staff said that you would look if something was failing, are there any on-site remedies? And if there weren't any on-site remedies, you've skipped completely looking at any other remedies. You just said, well, if it's failing, you assume that you're going to sewer it.
No, the trigger does require that there not be an on-site remedy.
It's
per
non-viability,
DPS.
right? We use this
Right.
word failure, but it's not failure. It's actually
don't want-
non-viability.
Right. Yeah,
don't
the
wanna get to
language, the
failure.
language in here does say on-site system failure, so that's obviously got to
Yeah.
happen. But also that cannot be addressed, and this is where we get to some judgment, reasonably by using a conventional replacement system, by innovative
Whatever.
and alternative and so forth. So it's not just that it failed, but that from DPS's perspective, there is not a reasonable on-site solution either.
Now, that makes sense for one property, so how do you
Right.
then get to then triggering a survey of everything else where it may have no signs of failure?
So the rationale for surveys, and again, maybe we don't want surveys, but the rationale for surveys is if you have something that failed, then you are probably going to look at sewer coming into the area, and then the question is, what's the most rational way to do that? And so then you look at other properties that perhaps have not failed. But that's a judgment then that the executive branch makes. It's a judgment that this council then makes. There are several reviews of that process before anything else can happen.
It seems to me when we talked about that, the possibility of failure, one of the things that was raised is that a failure can easily be caused by lack of maintenance and a bunch of things that don't have anything to do with any long-term viability conditions of the area in general, but could be the specific ways that a person handled their property. I mean,
I think
that
that-
that was one of the things they talked about.
It's not failure, Mr. Chairman, it's non-viability, right? It's not just that something has failed, it's that it can't be replaced or fixed.
Again, I think the point of the controversy, if you will, is not about what triggers a survey. It is who else is included in the survey and what the standard should be for them, okay? And basically, we did not create a standard for other people being involved in the survey with any great specificity. We did require great specificity with respect to what the triggering mechanism is. So that is the debate before us, fundamentally, as to whether or not you feel, and the council feels, that no one should be allowed to raise their hand to be included in the survey unless they are failing or have a problem themselves, as opposed to simply saying, gosh, guys, I just as soon have sewer as opposed to septic, so I'll raise my hand, which can, in fact, happen, has happened under the survey process that we are currently using, because actually the current survey process does not even require, as a triggering mechanism, a failure.
Alan Sukup with DEP, that's correct. I would have to say that in most of the cases that we've had so far, and it's about 18 of them, property owners who've requested surveys, the fundamental reason is not that I just prefer sewer. It's each of these property owners has raised specific questions with regard to the long-term viability of using a septic system. Now, some of those may be misinterpretations, and that's part of our process to determine what are viable concerns. But so far, the people who've just raised their hand and said, we'd rather have sewer, we've said, no, that's really not survey quality. Thank you.
So can you be clear what's going to happen if you have one failure documented and you don't have others, and then somebody else raises their hand and say, I want to be included in the survey even if I don't have a failure?
Well, the way this is set up right now, property owner can come to us with a problem, and we can deal with it as a problem, single problem. What they can also do is come to us with a problem and say, I believe there are other problems in my neighborhood, and I've also gotten, in the two we have so far, I've also gotten other people I've talked to who feel the same way. And here are their properties, and here are their letters of concern. That's sort of the starting point of, at least right now, that's the starting point of what we look at. Then, under the recommendation that the T&E committee came up with last month, the idea would be we would look at those properties, we would have DPS look at those properties of the applicants for the survey and evaluate, is there a problem here? on any of them. We've also included language there that says, they have to agree to have their septic systems evaluated by a professional evaluator. That's not the word I was looking for, but
Technician.
so what is true, what we're looking at primarily here as a change from what we did or what we established back in 2016 with the Glen Hills study area is what is the threshold for starting that survey process? What qualifies a particular area for a survey? If we come back and say, well, there's really no other problem here, we'll deal with the single property. But if we do perceive and determine that there are constraints here that could limit the availability of septic service in the future, that's when we start expanding and we come back to you with a recommendation.
I'd just say that explanation isn't clear in the written document. That explanation makes me more comfortable than what I read, because it gets to the point that you're actually going to do a study of the other systems that might be requesting, or have a private person do a study. Because we had talked about accepting somebody's service records, how many times they had been pumped, or what somebody else said who evaluated their system. As long as you're going to do that, I'm fine with including people who pass, that triggers a reason to do a study.
The language for that, admittedly, it's just a paragraph, is on Circle 39 in the packet. It's the first full paragraph on that page. We can expand that and detail it more if you feel it's necessary. But that was our attempt to, and it's not part of area-wide problems. It's part of specifically of the survey process section of that part of the text.
There's also
More
a provision
clarity
that
is
a property owner could opt out of the survey process.
Right.
Okay, Mr. Katz.
Thank you very much. And as is no secret, my concern obviously is about the Glen Hills area. And Keith, while you're walking us through, I don't know that you have to give it up front, but while you're walking us through, can you explain the council-approved envelope, what that means? And I've certainly received emails and other correspondence that the Glen Hills area believes that they are in the council-approved envelope, and they had the various restrictions about the master plan, et cetera. But if you could please explain that so that it becomes clearer during your discussion, I'd appreciate it.
Well, I think we could hopefully answer that quickly now. The established service envelopes, both water and sewer, are based on master plan recommendations. So if you thumb through any master plan, probably in the last 25 years, there's a section on water and sewer policy, and it usually clearly notes where water and sewer are assumed to be provided in those areas and where it's not. And that's what then the water and sewer plan takes as gospel going forward, if you will, for its general policy recommendations for where a property is considered to be, if it requests sewer, to be consistent with existing plans or not. And as you can imagine, the master plans involve a tremendous amount of community discussion, policy discussion, elected officials, appointed officials, going through many, many different priorities, environmental planning, land use, development, everything, and settle on those recommendations. And we're very concerned if, at the staff level, of going back and revisiting those sewer versus, being in the envelope versus outside the envelope, outside of that master plan process. And I think that's why, as we add restrictions to the survey or restrictions to individual properties, it is important because those details were not included in the current policy, but if we're adding restrictions, it is important to note, do those apply, or note that they apply outside the envelope where there is not an expectation of sewer service, but that within the envelope, under general policies, a property owner can seek a category change at any time without having to have a public health reason or any other specific reason for seeking it. They're within the envelope and they can ask to get a category change. Now, the applicant still has to cover the costs for that sewer extension if an extension is required, but there's not an assumption that that applicant has to point to a specific policy in the water and sewer plan for why they should get sewer. It's considered consistent with existing plans. Now, with regard to Glen Hills, I know that was your second point, and certainly the council spent a lot of time on this a couple of years ago, looking at the water and sewer plan policies, looking at the master plan language that's very specific for Glen Hills and the Potomac subregion master plan. And I've also, staff also talked with folks that were there at the creation of that Potomac master plan, both at the council and planning board and executive staff. And that, plus reading the language in the Glen Hills plan, from staff's perspective, makes very clear that Glen Hills is not in the established sewer envelope.
Even though there's a map that says something different than that?
Well, I will say first, that's a planning department map, so they would have to speak to the map. But that's not to say that sewer in the Potomac subregion is not a confusing checkerboard pattern of islands, which makes it very confusing to the layperson looking at a map. That's not the case in much of the rest of the county, where you have fairly clear lines. This side of the road is in, that side of the road is out. Potomac does have a unique history to it, which makes it much more complicated than other areas. But even with that said, what is governing here is the language in the master plan. Regardless of whether that map has a line in the right place, what governs is what the language says in the master plan. And we could go over the language again, but staff feels it's very clear. It speaks repeatedly to minimizing sewer extensions in the area. It would not say that if it was assuming that these areas were in the sewer envelope.
And doesn't it say pending the Glen Hills area sanitary study, and wasn't that done?
The study was done, but the language notes that even with the study, that the goal of the study itself was to minimize sewer extensions into the Glen Hills area.
Okay.
So once again, it would not have said that if there was an expectation that, or an assumption that Glen Hills was in the envelope. It was in, you could argue, the envelope prior to the master plan being approved, and that and other areas in that area are part of the reason why you have this confusing pattern of who's in and who's out. But I think any common reading of the text in the master plan is pretty clear. And that's why staff has recommended that if there's an interest in revisiting that, it should be done in a limited master plan amendment.
Which is, I guess, 18423 or something that we would, at some point, which obviously I'm supporting that would happen. But I believe, I've said this many times, it's going to be one more time, I believe that we have not treated the Glen Hills area in a fair manner. I believe that at one point you've said yes, at one point you said maybe, at one point you said we'll get back to you. And I'm saying you, I don't mean you directly, but we've said we'll get back to you, and at every point it's we were just kidding. It is not fair what has happened to the Glen Hills area. Other such parts of this discussion today for the sewer and water, I'm fine with it. But Glen Hills, I absolutely consider that it's not being treated fairly. Thank you.
Ms. Fleury?
Thank you. Well, on that last point, we're not changing anything with respect to Glen Hills, correct?
No, we should.
Well, the
the
issue was the ongoing work, and and that's going to continue, correct?
Well, let's step back. The assumption within the committee's recommended language that staff drafted, that would be a countywide policy that would apply everywhere, including Glen Hills. There's not a carve-out.
There's an ongoing survey, correct?
Yeah, there's one ongoing survey in the Glen Hills area.
Right, and that's not affected by this.
Well, staff's assumption, and once again, this is obviously up to the council, is that that study should proceed. But obviously, we still have recommendations that would have to come forth from that, from the executive, and action by the council.
Oh, yeah.
At that point, presumably, whatever the council does in the 10-year plan, that study would be subject to that, whatever that is. If it says that the council will review them on a case-by-case basis, it would do that. If it says that there must be you know, all the properties in the area must have a failure. Well, that would certainly drive, you know,
Oh,
the
but we're not
recommendation
saying
would
that.
be.
Not saying that.
But
You know, look,
if it's si-
we are arguing about how many angels are on the head of this pin here, and at the end of the day, the council will make a decision, right, on every one of these. We're only talking about how you get into the evaluation, but not how you get out of it, correct?
Right, that's the way.
Isn't that right,
That's the way the
Keith?
committee's text is written today,
Right.
yes.
But it should be the case. And, you know, we've spent an awful lot of time trying to put people in boxes here, communities that have needs, that have legitimate needs, staff that has thoughtful evaluation talents, a council that's going to worry about all this. And so I have to say, let's move on. The committee worried about all this last, when we met in July, right? Mr. Berliner and I thought we had agreement that we needed something more than what we had previously. And that's what the committee recommendation is. And I would urge us all to say, okay, that's okay. And at the end of the day, the council will make the decision anyways. And let's agree that there are lots of competing issues that will always arise. They're never going to go away. And that's okay. This stuff is difficult. Community issues are important to everyone. The environment's important. Clean water and clean health sanitation is equally important. So how this all gets worked out will continue to be looked at very thoughtfully. But geez, you know, let's just move on.
Good advice. Is there, we have a committee recommendation. Has it been fully characterized?
There were a couple other elements that I wanted to mention that had been included in the staff packet for the committee, but not explicitly discussed. One was just mentioned earlier, was the opt-out provision. This was something that some community folks had expressed concern about, especially if you're outside the envelope, being compelled at some point perhaps, or feeling like you would be compelled at some point to connect. So we have clarified that property owners in survey areas outside the sewer envelope would not be, or they could opt out of a survey, and that DEP would be notifying property owners of that right to opt out if they wish to. If they do opt out, then they would not be part of any recommendation that did go forward. Their category would not change, and they would remain as they are now. So that...
Mr. President, if I could I suggest that we accept that recommendation unless there's objection?
Without objection?
Okay.
The other was to clarify that the intent of approving sewer through the survey process is to address problems, as we talked about, not to encourage development that otherwise would not likely have occurred. And so we did also clarify that if, as part of either an individual case through a public health issue or through one of these surveys, the property owner would not be allowed to subdivide their property. So they wouldn't be subdividing onto two different sewer connections. They couldn't do that anyway, but in this case, they also couldn't subdivide their property, one on sewer and one on septic. So it makes clear that the intent of extending is not to avail people of subdivision, but to just serve the current properties that are in place now.
Without objection? Okay.
All right. Mr. Leventhal.
Yeah, I'm just not in agreement with the whole direction of the council on any of this. So I'm not in agreement that forever and ever, large lots would never be subdivided under any circumstances. I just think I'm not going to have a lot to say on this because I'm just not in agreement. I just think it's too restrictive. It's not fair to property owners. We're foreclosing options that we can't even predict. We're requiring people to stick with outmoded technology, 16th century technology. It's just wrong. I just think the whole way we're headed here is out of touch with what I understand to be good water quality. And certainly, I think we're depriving future generations of homeowners of options to utilize their property in ways that just go too far. And so I can't say whether, a granny unit or an additional home might somehow be built or subdivided. I just, you know, I've been doing an awful lot of reading over the break about the use of zoning to further segregation. And I'm just deeply concerned that we are, you know, protecting wealthy, affluent subdivisions at the expense of, you know, future needs that we cannot today predict. And I just think it's wrong. I just think that the entire direction of the committee recommendation, the entire direction of the amendment that started this conversation, it's just wrong. I don't agree with it, I don't support it, and I don't agree with this latest iteration of it because I can't foresee whether it might be appropriate to build a home somewhere in the county. I've consistently voted to protect the RDT zone. This goes way, way, way beyond the RDT zone. And I just think for generations to come, future councils are going to find their hands tied where they're going to want to respond to a sympathetic case. You know, we're going to have a conversation about accessory apartments, we're going to have a conversation about granny units, but here we're saying that if you're in a septic area, it's got to be large lot, it's got to be exclusive. There are racial connotations to it. You know, if we were to look at a racial equity lens here, which council members have promised we would do, I don't think that this whole conversation would reflect very well on this body.
All right, certainly disagree with everything you said. And I will articulate my view in supporting this legislation as we get towards the end, but Mr. Levchenko, is there anything remaining in the packet?
The only other item has to do with individual public health cases. As you mentioned earlier, many, many cases don't rise to the level of creating a survey. We just get an inquiry or a notification from DPS that there's a problem. They go out and they identify a problem, and then the question is what happens next. And what I've tried to do on page 5 of the packet is note some clarifications. The current policy is very vague about how some of these processes would work, and so like in other areas of this plan, we've tried to note how things currently work in some cases with more detail, or in some cases try to, in fact, make some changes to the approval process. And that's what I've tried to do on page 5 with individual public health cases. And it tries to distinguish between existing failures documented by DPS and which of those can go through an administrative approval process where the council won't even see them, versus those more sort of on the edge cases where there's problems and DPS has identified an issue, but you would need a sewer extension perhaps to solve it, and there could be policy implications from how that sewer extension is aligned. And those kinds of cases are noted here as still having to go back to the council for action. So we're not trying to necessarily change how things work now with regard to these cases, but we're trying to clarify which ones can go through an administrative process versus which ones would go through the council for action. And lean heavily on DPS to identify those serious cases without a remedy that can go through administrative approval versus those cases that are more, I don't want to say debatable, but have real issues, but there could be some options, and sewer may be an option that they recommend for certain reasons, but it may not necessarily be a slam dunk, and it's something where there may be other policy issues that the council may want to consider. And we see those now in some cases. So this is just trying to lay that out a little more clearly. And it's also in light of the fact that we are trying to be more specific with the surveys as well. So we're trying to have parallel consistency there as well.
All right, thank you for describing the committee's recommendation. I wanted to just articulate my view on this issue. Others have done so, and we'll have a vote. This is a challenging issue. When I first began to think about it, I understood it as an environmental issue and about, waste into streams and sprawl and so on. I have since come to really view this primarily as a housing issue. And I think that the requirement to have functioning septic is a requirement that preserves middle-class housing in this county. And what it's really about to me is mansionization. And when septic is allowed to be replaced by water and sewer, you end up with nice middle-class homes being replaced by very large homes that are essentially, very, very expensive. And if I thought there was a problem with requiring septic, I wouldn't support septic, but septic works fine when it does. And for the most part, it works fine. There are occasions when it doesn't, and we must allow people to make good use of their property and continue to live in a place where septic does not work, where it's not viable. But for the most part, it works fine, and when it fails, it can be replaced or fixed. So I came to view this as an issue of preserving affordable, quality housing in this county, in parts of the county where it's not otherwise really available. If you go into the Glen Hills community, you see a real dichotomy in neighborhoods that are on septic and neighborhoods that are not. And I would like to continue to have access to those neighborhoods for people who can't afford a $2.5, $3 million house. And to me, septic is one way to achieve that. So that's my own personal approach to this issue. Everyone approaches it differently, but it is what matters to me, and it's how I came down on it. Mr. Berliner, a final comment? We will.
I just think one of the issues that we have not addressed, and I think Mr. Hucker was the one that raised it originally, was what's the obligation of those that have septic systems to maintain them? There are jurisdictions, like Hamilton County, Ohio, that require ongoing verification that people are maintaining their septic systems. So I do hope that the next council will take that matter up and look at what are the obligations so that people aren't simply raising their hand after not having attended to things that they should have attended to.
Yeah, I will say that in earlier discussions, other issues in the 10-year plan, we looked at the on-site system in regulatory process, if you will. What is the county's role there? And I think there was unanimity that we needed better information, and so we did ask DPS and DEP to move forward with a much more robust database of the systems that are out there. That, combined with an education and outreach effort to folks with different types of systems to tell them what they should be doing on a regular basis. That's sort of the first step. As you mentioned, other jurisdictions go further and require either third-party certification or actual government inspection. And that's certainly something we can look at. There's obviously fiscal implications, how you raise the resources in order to cover the costs, the additional county costs for something like that, or what the burden would be on the property owner for that, and what the appropriate balance is. So I think we wanted to get through this first stage of learning more about what we have in place now, and try to initiate a fairly general education outreach effort first, and bring back the next governmental step in the process if there was interest with regard to inspections.
Thank you for that clarification.
Let me just add very briefly that I know this is a major concern for Mr. Elrich and others on the council. We have been in a process of trying to sort out septic versus sewer, and right now we have a property list of about 18,000 properties that we, based on our evaluation, believe are on septic systems. And our intent is to work on a mailing that will go to those property owners, not a huge mailing, but something that will give them reference to information that's already available on county websites and state websites, to get them in the loop. What I'm hoping is that I will get lots of calls from people that said, gee, I didn't know any of this stuff, and we can educate them. Thank you.
All right. Final comment, Mr. Elrich, and then we'll go to a vote.
There are a couple of words that I would hope you guys could think about in the wordsmithing, and it's all around potential failure and likely failure and definitions of that, because I know people are really antsy about having their properties delineated as it's going to fail tomorrow. And so I'm not sure whether anticipated or likely failure are the best words to use, and I just would ask that maybe you think about, is there another phrase that conveys that this is something to pay attention to without indicating that somebody is going to fail, so that we don't have people saying that you've now labeled me a problem, and that's something that may affect my ability to sell my property. The other thing I'd be interested in is how do we keep people updated about as technologies change, as things get approved. I mean, for example, to the extent that your prison can use waterless toilets in an addition, it may obviate the need to, extend a septic system in order to add on a granny flat or add on another bedroom and a bathroom for somebody, if there are ways around that. If the state, I don't know where we are in the state of gray water, but I understand that we're still in a muddled state with the state of Maryland about gray water. But gray water recycling is a way that people can vastly, extend the life of their septic systems by giving them an alternative way of getting rid of a bunch of liquid. We ought to, I think, at least make the information available occasionally, at least on our website, so that people who are thinking about this long-term, as new options become available, we provide the information so people might take advantage of the options. And to Roger's point, I agree that we ought to look at some kind of management of this, but you don't want to be intrusive and you don't want to make it expensive to either homeowners or to the counties. We should get an idea of what these kind of surveys cost, either if we were to do it or somebody else were to do it. But I mean, the benefit is you don't get failure by neglect. And I don't think people deliberately neglect in some cases. I just don't think people always understand what it is they need to do and the timeliness of what they need to do. So anything we can do to facilitate that, I think, would be good for us in the long run.
All right, thank you. We have a recommendation before us. Is this a show of hands, Ms. Murphy, or?
Yeah, I think today is focused
Oh,
on
that's
just
right.
the
Well, it's a
straw
straw
vote.
vote. Show of hands, straw vote.
And just to clarify, the council already has straw voted the rest of the 10-year plan discussion. This is just the final element.
This is the final element of it.
So once, assuming you do straw vote this successfully today, we still need to bring back for consent action the final language. Staff will work with council members and executive staff to finalize that language consistent with the straw vote today, but you will see it one more time before final action.
Thank you. All those in favor, raise your hands. And that is 8 council members in favor, and all those opposed. Mr. Leventhal opposed. All right, that concludes this item for today, and we'll be back at 1:30 for a number of public hearings. Thank you, Mr. Levchenko. I know you worked very hard on this.
Right. Just one more note. I think given some of the wordsmithing we do need to do, I think next week consent is probably a bit ambitious.
Okay.
So we're probably looking 2 weeks out from today.
Okay. Very good. Thank you, DP, for participation. Why don't we begin? Now, we are here for a handful of public hearings. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. This is a public hearing on zoning text amendment 1806 MPDU bonus density. This ZTA would revise or establish moderately priced dwelling unit MPDU density bonus standards for certain residential, commercial residential, employment, and overlay zones, and generally amend provisions concerning MPDUs. Councilmember Florine proposed amendments to ZTA 1806 in an August 24th memorandum to council members. That memorandum and the proposed amendments are in the packet for today's hearing. A Fed committee, Planning, Housing, Economic Development Committee, work session on this ZTA is tentatively scheduled for Thursday, September 20th. Persons wishing to submit additional materials for the council's consideration should do so before the close of business September 14th. For those scheduled to testify today, please bring your copies of your testimony to the clerk at this time. And if you would like to follow the progress of this or any council bill or zoning text amendment, the council website has a subscribe function. Go to the council website and use the View Council Records and Legislative Updates link to learn how. That's a new addition. We've been working on this subscribe feature for legislation throughout the year, and so I'm working to incorporate that into our standard public hearing announcements so that people who want to follow along can sign up. And what happens is, as that bill moves through each stage of the legislative process, if there's a committee meeting scheduled, another committee meeting scheduled, full council is scheduled, you get an alert in your inbox saying ZTA 1806 committee meeting scheduled for this day. Our speakers today will be Casey Anderson, also speaking to item 789, Stacy Spann, Della Stolesworth, Bill Commoners, Robert Goldman, and Patricia Harris. And we invite them all to join us in front and to speak in that order.
Thank you. I'm Casey Anderson, Chair of the Montgomery County Planning Board. The board and planning staff support the modifications proposed by Councilmember Florine to ZTA 1806, and we believe that the three-tiered bonus density system proposed in this modified ZTA meets the county's goal of furthering incentives for production of affordable housing while still calibrating the amount of additional density that's provided in exchange for additional moderately priced dwelling units. There is some precedent for uncapping bonus density available with MPDUs in the CR zones, and we believe that in the residential zones that the existing development standards, including minimum lot sizes and setbacks, will prevent excessive amounts of density from being obtained, even in cases where applicants are willing to provide an extraordinary number of MPDUs. So for those reasons, we support the modified ZTA.
So you're going to testify subsequently on the other items, okay? Thanks. Let's do it that way. Stacy Spann.
Good afternoon. Council President Reamer and members of the council, my name is Stacy Spann. I'm the Executive Director of the Housing Opportunities Commission of Montgomery County. On behalf of HOC, I'd like to express our support for Zoning Text Amendment 18-06. We thank the council members for their thoughtful review of laws that keep Montgomery County at the forefront of inclusionary zoning. We also thank council, DHCA, and planning staff for leading collaborative discussions that help produce a consensus among many stakeholders on this issue. ZTA 1806 is the natural conclusion to many years of stakeholder engagement, discussions, and council action in pursuit of modernizing the county's continued commitment to affordable housing. It unifies affordable housing incentives within the CR zone and Chapter 25A and reconciles density bonus with the county's push to provide above 12.5% MPDUs across Montgomery County. Throughout its history, Montgomery County has demonstrated a robust commitment to affordable housing. We led the way with the nation's first inclusionary zoning law and have since provided the best example for creating economically integrated communities that extend opportunities for all. ZTA 1806 renews that long-standing commitment. It sets higher standards for those who wish to develop new housing here and recognizes the growing number of developers that are willing to provide MPDUs above and beyond required levels. This is momentum that should be built upon and encouraged. Though we have some of the most effective and innovative affordable housing tools in the country, we are not immune to the nation's growing housing crisis. The need to preserve and expand the supply of housing at every price point is critical to bolstering equity and access to opportunity. We understand that some people wish to see less housing built, or at least that it be built somewhere they can't see. But we have a responsibility to explore every available avenue to provide housing for the more than 30,000 households on HOC's Housing Path waitlist, folks who work hard and who treasure having a home just as dearly as those who would oppose this measure. Montgomery County prides itself on its diversity and inclusion. We cease to be a truly unified county if we allow walls to be built around affluent enclaves on behalf of those already inside them, if we say to those who are living elsewhere that obsolete, energy inefficient, job-distant housing ought to be enough for them. Therefore, we urge the council to hold fast to our county's values as we modernize inclusive zoning by supporting ZTA 1806. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Spann. Della Stolesworth, I'm thinking you'll be speaking for, you're Ralph Bennett, and you are speaking in behalf of the Affordable Housing Conference? And there you go.
Thank you. I sit in support of the text amendment 1806. I would associate myself with Director Spann's comments. The MPDU program serves as a national model, we know this. Yet Montgomery County, like the rest of the nation, faces an affordable housing crisis of unprecedented proportions. The amendment under consideration, in addition to clarifying definitions and ensuring proper placement in the zoning code of all bonus density provisions, allows density bonuses in additional zones, thereby potentially increasing the supply of affordable residential units, and by the way, increasing the balance of location of such units in the county, long an issue. We further urged the council to incorporate Councilmember Florine's amendments to the proposed ZTA, removing the cap on bonus density, bringing developments with more than 20% MPDUs in line with the bonus density system currently successful within the CR zones, and clarifying and standardizing MPDU density bonus allowances in an easy-to-understand chart. At a time when 80% of the county residents earning below average incomes are cost burdened, and with the demand for affordable rental units increasing dramatically, a measure that increases the supply of affordable housing, however modestly, must be supported. Thank you, and thank you for all you do.
Thank you, Ralph, and the Affordable Housing Conference. Bill Commoners.
Good afternoon, President Reamer, members of the council. Welcome back. My name is Bill Commoners with Lurch, Early and Brewer. I'm speaking as an individual in support of ZTA 1806 as it is recommended to be amended by Councilmember Florine in her memorandum. As amended, the ZTA provides a comprehensive, consistent methodology applicable throughout the county for providing bonus density in return for greater amounts of MPDUs. Bonus density is absolutely critical to the offset that added cost of those higher percentage and thereby create an incentive for building greater amounts of affordable housing. The amendment is critical to this effort because the original ZTA only covered a part of the problem. The code has two approaches for bonus density, one in Chapter 55A and one in Chapter 59 in the CR zones. As introduced, the ZTA translated the bonus density chart from 25A into the zoning ordinance, but other existing bonus density provisions for the CR zones were simultaneously eliminated. Yet the CR zones are those areas most likely to be able to accommodate added MPDUs. The ZTA should first do no harm and not eliminate the existing opportunities. Chapter 25 authorized bonus density for MPDUs only up to 15%. The CR zones took a different approach, excluding MPDU density from gross floor area when exceeding 15%. The amendment provides bonus density the same way as the zoning ordinance does today, in differing percentages and taking all those different processes and combining them into a single method located in a single place that's applied uniformly throughout the zoning ordinance and the county. The amended ZTA continues to provide bonus density as MPDU quantity increases beyond the percentages in the 25A chart, thus providing an incentive for greater percentages of affordable housing. But to be conservative, the rate for bonus density decreases as the MPDU percentage increases. But at least having the percentage continue provides an incentive to go beyond 15%. The ability to increase the physical building envelope to accommodate the bonus density is just as critical to success as the density itself. The ZTA proposes to use the tested methodology that already exists today in the CR zones, allowing additional height to accommodate the area devoted to MPDUs. This method has been working and should continue. The amended ZTA enhances the tools the county has in place already so as to provide a greater incentive to provide greater amounts of MPDUs, especially greater than 15%. It does this through a refinement of those existing tools, adjusting them to acknowledge the multifamily character of much development in the county today, and thereby maximizing opportunities. The ZTA and the amendment have been a collaborative effort among the staffs of Council, Planning Board, DHCA, and HOC. They sought and received comment from the industry to assure the methodology would be economically feasible, and I thank them for their effort and for their listening. This amendment is the right way to proceed. I encourage you to amend the ZTA and adopt it as amended. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Commoners. Robert Goldman.
Good afternoon. On behalf of Montgomery Housing Partnership, please allow me to take this opportunity to provide our thoughts on zoning text amendment 1806 and 1807. First, I want to take a moment to thank the Council for the passages of Bills 3417 and 3817, which further the county's ability to promote the development of affordable housing throughout Montgomery County. These two ZTAs continue on that path of incentivizing the inclusion of affordable housing. I'd like to first address ZTA 1807. Accessory dwelling units are a key tool to increasing the supply of affordable housing in the county. They provide one of the most cost-effective ways to create affordable housing across the county. ADUs also serve as a great way for older residents living on a fixed income to bring in additional funds and have an extra set of eyes on the property to make sure everything is okay. The best way to encourage ADUs and do it in a way that the county can monitor is to limit the barriers to establishing an ADU. The current county restrictions on parking and minimum distance between ADUs limits the number of ADUs that can be built and permitted. 2 years ago, California loosened their regulations of ADUs, and applications increased from 90 in 2015 to over 2,000 in 2017. These are affordable units that don't require subsidy, but now provide almost 2,000 households with an affordable place to live. We have the opportunity to do that here as well. This ZTA is the first step in the right direction, and we fully support its passage. Now to ZTA 1806, MPDU density bonus. With the passage of the aforementioned bills relating to the MPDU program, it is important to ensure that the zoning code aligns with the intent of the program. As initially introduced, there were some discrepancies between the two. However, with the clarifications and the amendments that Councilmember Florine has introduced, the bill now aligns with the language of Chapter 25A and also with the intent of incentivizing developers to build above the minimum requirement. We ask the Council to support the amended version of 1806. Our housing crisis is severe. As Planning Board Chair Casey Anderson recently published on his blog that over the next 5 years, Montgomery County needs over 1,892 housing permits in order to keep pace with the overall expected demand. With 45% of renters spending more than 35% of their income on housing, we need to find a way to keep pace with the demand and make sure that housing is affordable. We will only reach that goal if the full development community builds more than the base MPDU requirement. The changes to the ZTA clarify the bonus densities and provide encouragement to developers. I'd also like to make it sort of a general point, as we're incentivizing and looking to incentivize the development of more MPDUs through providing density bonuses and relaxing height restrictions. These only work when there are not other multiple impending restrictions. Restrictions on setbacks, lot sizes, and other components in the zoning code prevent many developers from going above the minimum requirement. If we truly want developers to build more, 15% or 20% or more MPDUs, then we need to remove all of the obstacles. I welcome the opportunity to discuss these thoughts with you further. Thank you.
Thank you. Patricia Harris.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Pat Harris with Lurch, Early and Brewer. I'm here before you this afternoon to suggest a minor addition to the ZTA to clarify an issue pertaining to the provision of MPDUs with respect to senior housing. We have worked with several senior housing providers who are considering developing senior living communities which will be exclusively independent living that will require conditional use approval. In evaluating the required affordable housing provisions and discussing the requirements with both DHCA and Park and Planning staff, it became apparent that there was a need to clarify that affordable housing units provided as part of a conditional use independent living development are considered MPDUs. Thus, I'm here this afternoon to propose that the section of the zoning ordinance setting forth the affordable housing requirements for independent living units include the additional words "and otherwise satisfies Chapter 25A." The proposed language has been attached to the testimony that I turned in. Importantly, we recognize the obligation for independent living units to provide MPDUs and are simply seeking language to confirm that the administration of these units will be under the MPDU law. Pursuant to the recently adopted MPDU legislation, this will require that 3% of the sales price of every unit in the independent living community be allocated to the Housing Initiative Fund. The zoning ordinance clearly provides that independent living units provided as part of a different type of conditional use, which is called a residential care facility, which is a facility that includes both assisted living and independent living units, must satisfy the MPDU provisions of the code. However, the zoning ordinance section providing for independent living conditional uses lack this clarity. The recommended language will make it clear that the oversight and control of the required affordable housing units falls within DHCA's purview. We appreciate your support of this minor addition, which is essentially a housekeeping item. Thank you.
Thank you, Pat. All right. Thank you very much for providing your testimony today, and we'll consider what you suggested carefully. We'll now move to agenda item number 7, zoning text amendment 1807. This is a public hearing on ZTA 1807, accessory residential uses, accessory apartments. This ZTA would remove the requirement for conditional use approval for all accessory apartments. It would also revise the limited use provisions for attached and detached accessory apartments and generally amend the provisions for accessory apartments. A Fed Committee work session on this ETA is tentatively scheduled for Monday, September 24th, and persons wishing to submit additional materials for the record should do so before the close of business, September 18th. And again, if you want to subscribe to updates on this CTA, you can do so from the council's website. Casey Anderson, followed by Jeffrey Slavin, I don't see the mayor, Andy Leo Harney, John Pauxis, Stephen Tellis, Sebastian Smoot, Pete Tomeo. Commissioner Chairman Anderson.
Thank you. Again, I'm Casey Anderson, and the Planning Board supports this CTA, but has what I hope you'll agree is a minor suggestion to strengthen it. As you recall, the last time the council addressed accessory dwelling units, I think there was consensus that it was not helpful to require all accessory dwelling units to go through conditional use process, and therefore, under the current law, if an accessory dwelling meets a list of criteria that are in the ordinance, they don't have to go through the process. So far, so good. The problem is that when an ADU fails to meet one of those criteria, they have to go through the entire conditional use process and hearing examiner's process, which includes on its face requirements for a traffic study, engineering drawings, a whole bunch of other bureaucratic requirements. The idea that we had was, in addition to reforming that process so the absence of off-street parking wouldn't throw an applicant into the entire process to consider all those other criteria that were not relevant to parking, even in a case where parking isn't an issue, we thought that it would be more effective at encouraging the creation of ADUs while still allowing neighbors who have concerns about parking to raise their complaints if we were to say that while a hearing would be held on the issue of parking, the presumption would be that parking is adequate unless somebody wants to come in and make the case that there's not enough parking on the street. So the idea would be to shift the burden so an applicant who wants to build an ADU that's not opposed by any of the neighbors doesn't have to hire a consultant or go to exhaustive lengths to try to document the presence of on-street parking. But if there is a situation where the neighbors have an issue that the street is parked up at all hours of the day and night and it would be unreasonable, which we concede that there may be those cases where the neighborhood is so tightly packed together and there's not enough parking on the street, that the people in the community who had concerns would still have an opportunity to raise them. So in all, we think the ZTA is a step forward at trying to accomplish what I think the council intended the last time it addressed this issue, but we would like to clean that up conclusively by streamlining the process and making sure that objections over parking are addressed, but not in a way that's unnecessarily cumbersome. Thank you.
Thank you, Casey. Andy Harney. If you'll put your microphone on, there you go.
Members of the County Council, thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak about Section 3's response to the proposed ZTA 1807. My name is Andy Leon Harney, and I'm the village manager of Section 3 of the Village of Chevy Chase. We all appreciate the pressing need for affordable housing in the county, and we understand the county's motivation trying to relax restrictions for getting a license. We appreciate, too, the fact that in the RNC, R60, and R90 zones in the proposed change, you've maintained the 300-foot separation rule. In the case of those zones, however, we would ask that you retain the conditional zoning use. We ask because we'd like the opportunity via a hearing to be able to evaluate and plan for additional units in our community. Why? Well, most of our streets are two-way with parking and only 16 feet wide. A little more than 20% of all the homes in our community share a driveway. So the 300-foot separation between units is essential along with the off-street parking restriction. If a resident applies for a license and there is no opportunity for community input, it might create a difficult situation for neighbors and for us to plan for the addition of new residents. As it is, according to the most recent census, the population density per square mile in Section 3 is among the most densely populated municipalities in the county. Recently, builders of a new home in our community had to resort to stick building the roof trusses because their streets are so narrow. There's no way they could get pre-made trusses to the site. We have restraints that others don't share. And for that reason, we would like the opportunity to have a hearing via the conditional use for every accessory apartment planned in our community. The only other issue that puzzles me that I'd like clarified is if there are any restrictions on the duration of stay for tenants in accessory apartments anywhere in the county. I ask this because the relaxation of licensing restrictions would seem to me to create an easy workaround for those who don't want to use Airbnb or other internet platforms to get an accessory apartment license and then rent out their apartments via Craigslist or other platform on a short-term basis without an agreement with the county or cost sharing with an online service, thus defeating the whole purpose of making it easier to license accessory apartments. In short, the apartments would be inspected and licensed, but the intended purpose to provide viable, affordable housing would be lost, as would the income stream for the county. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Harney. John Paxis. Help me on the pronunciation, John. Apologize.
Paxtis. John Paxtis. Good afternoon. My name is John Paxtis. I'm the president and CEO of Habitat for Humanity Metro Maryland. Habitat for Humanity is a nonprofit corporation that was formed under the laws of the state of Maryland in 1982 for the purpose of creating decent and affordable home ownership opportunities in Montgomery and Prince George's County. It is our belief that Habitat is in a unique position to solve the affordable housing crisis by building accessory apartments, also known as accessory dwelling units or ADUs. Habitat is a licensed general contractor with substantial experience building new single-family homes, townhouses, and rehabilitating distressed foreclosed properties. Habitat's repair and weatherization program has helped hundreds of owner-occupied homeowners, including older adults and veterans, to improve the quality of their life and help reduce energy bills. Habitat is blessed with the support of the business community, the faith community, and 5,000 volunteers each year who are ready, willing, and able to make a difference in this community. Habitat for Humanity strongly supports zoning text amendments 18-07 and 26-18 introduced by the members of the Planning, Housing, and Economic Development Committee, also known as the FED Committee. Habitat for Humanity supports the notion that implementing these provisions of these text amendments will reduce barriers to low-income means of adding to the housing supply. Habitat for Humanity is particularly interested in serving residents with household incomes that are less than 80% of area median income, including older adults, veterans, and individuals with disabilities. Habitat believes there are numerous environmental, social, and economic benefits to the increased development of accessory apartments, some of which we list here in my testimony. We encourage your support of these zoning text amendments that will reduce barriers to low-cost means of additional housing supply. I'm just going to go through the environmental benefits to create housing with a relatively small environmental impact. ADUs tend to be built where there is active market demand for rental housing in residential zones. These neighborhoods tend to be where residents can choose to walk, bike, or ride public transit. Permitted ADUs should reduce the number of illegal ADUs that are often unsafe and do not meet code requirements. The social benefits: ADUs provide more affordable housing options in residential neighborhoods without dramatically changing the neighborhood's character. ADUs enable older adults to find viable options to downsize, control costs, and remain in a familiar neighborhood. ADUs provide a unique configuration of housing for multi-generational households, including older adults, millennials, or newly married couples. Some of the economic benefits include utilize existing infrastructure of roads, water, and sewer connections, generally create housing near employment, retail centers, and transit corridors, generates jobs for construction, generate more tax revenue and taxable income for the county, and are wealth-building opportunities for homeowners by providing a stream of rental income. Thank you for your time and consideration. Happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, John. Stephen Tellis.
Okay.
Members of the council, I'm a resident of Tacoma Park, Maryland. I'm also a professor of political science at Johns Hopkins University and the co-author of a recent book called The Captured Economy, much of which addressed the economic and social consequences of excessive zoning in America's wealthiest and highest growing areas. You might recognize that as Montgomery County. It's my strong opinion that the subject of accessory dwelling units is best understood within this context, and that'll be the main objective of my testimony. There's now a growing scholarly consensus that excessive zoning is deeply implicated in sluggish economic growth nationally and burgeoning racial and economic inequality. Regions like Washington, D.C., along with Seattle, San Francisco, New York, and Boston are where the greatest technological dynamism is clustered and the highest incomes. But these cities are increasingly turning into the equivalent of gated communities, guarded by zoning that prevents housing supply from matching housing demand. The consequence is that the full economic potential of these areas is not being achieved, with impacts in the larger national economy, impacts, I would add, that are widely recognized as fueling populist nationalism. Excessive zoning also has enormous impacts on economic inequality. While zoning makes finding a place to live in regions like our own so difficult, it also has impacts that might be harder to see, right? One, it leads at the margin to people moving to other less productive areas, right? So with lower average incomes, moving to these other places means that people miss out on the higher salaries they could get working in higher growth areas like Montgomery County and the larger Washington area. Second, for those who do move to regions like ours, skyrocketing rents mean that higher incomes get clawed back by living costs. Third, stringent zoning near the city core, and the description fits much of our county, including Tacoma Park, where I'm from, generates sprawl as opposition to development simply pushes it further out or to other regions entirely. In addition, higher fuel use and related impacts on climate, excessive zoning means we miss out on many of the benefits of urban density. The relationship this to ADUs is as compared to other ways of increasing housing, which inevitably, and I can say as a Tacoma Park resident, I can say this with great certainty, create enormous political conflict, enormous delays, years of delays. The advantage of ADUs is they can go from initial planning all the way to actual having somebody actually in place within a year, right? As compared to the years and years it would take, especially where we are, where much of our housing within a half mile of the metro is simply single-family housing. So the basic argument here is there are large national consequences to the decisions you're making. ADUs are the most politically viable way of actually moving in the short term to actually address them.
Thank you so much, Stephen. Appreciate that testimony. And I should mention that Mayor Kate Stewart reached out to me, and she had hoped to be here today, but she did mention that you would be speaking today, yes. And her schedule did not allow her to be here today, but she, thank you for what you've said today. And our next speaker will be Sebastian Smoot.
Hi, good afternoon. My name's Sebastian Smoot. I own a home in Cloverly, and right now we're renting it out, but the lease is going to end next year, and when we move back in, we want to live in that house for a really long time, and eventually we also want my in-laws to move into that house. My father-in-law, he had a stroke about a year ago. He's having trouble living on his own. They live in Ellicott City in Howard County. Both my in-laws are retired. They are kind of in a challenge with making their mortgage payments and so forth. They look into turning their house in Howard County into an ADU. The permitting process, the inspections, the legal costs were all just too much for them, too complicated for them, so they decided they weren't going to do it. So me and my wife, we offered that when we moved back into our house in Cloverly, we wanted to turn our house into an ADU. And I'm really looking forward to this option of skipping all the conditional acceptance and streamlining the process. I don't want to have to hire a lawyer or a consultant for my in-laws to live with me. I mean, sure, we could have them live with us without having an ADU, but we kind of want to have them to have their own space and us to have their own space as well. I'm sure some of you can kind of understand that, but we want to just streamline the process. We want people that want to rent out their parts of their property, whether it's detached or attached. We want to make it easy for people, regular people, to do that without having to go through a lot of legal hoops and hiring lawyers. And whether it's for relatives or whether it's for people that are not related that are looking for affordable housing and are struggling to find it, as you hear so often is an issue in Montgomery County. So the reason I'm testifying is just three things. One, to express support for the bill. Second, I also want to say that I think we can go a lot further. With the setback requirements, I think those can be very tricky. If my next door neighbor puts in an ADU before I do, I'm going to be out of luck. My in-laws are going to be out of luck, and we're not going to be able to do it. I don't really think that's fair, especially if maybe my next door neighbor is the only one in all of Cloverly to put an ADU. Why should that put a restriction on me? So I think the setbacks need to be re-examined and thought of a way to make them a little fairer. I also think that the lot size cap for the detached units, I think that also needs to be revisited. I think that I own 1/3 of an acre. I think that's plenty to put a detached house depending on the site footprint and everything. So I hope you look at that again. So those are the first two things I wanted to take care of in this testimony. And the third is just to put on the record that I plan to do it so that I'm holding myself responsible when I come back. Thank you.
Thank you, Sebastian. We hope you don't have to have lawyers after your in-laws move in either. So, sorry. Pete Tomeo.
And I'm speaking on both ZTA 1806 and 1807. I'm Pete Tomeo, the Montgomery County Advocacy Manager at the Coalition for Smarter Growth. We are a 20-year regional organization dedicated to making the case for walkable, inclusive, and transit-accessible communities. Thank you for the opportunity to testify today. We want to thank the Council for your continued work to strengthen Montgomery's commitment to affordable housing. Recent master plans from White Flint to West Bard have placed an importance on increasing our affordable housing production, specifically in high-cost neighborhoods. Both ZTA 1806 and ZTA 1807 continue this commitment and are important tools to lessen Montgomery's housing shortage. ZTA 1806 provides clarity to the MPDU bonus density program and helps further incentives for increased MPDU construction. A clear three-tiered MPDU density bonus program is easier for both the public and the development community to understand. This ZTA complements the Council's recent work on Bills 3417 and 3817. 2010 Century Foundation report found that one of the most effective ways to lessen the achievement gap in Montgomery County is to include affordable housing in high opportunity neighborhoods. We believe that ZTA 1806, with the amendments proposed by Councilmember Florine, helps to incentivize MPDU production where we need it most in our higher income areas. We ask the Council to support this ZTA. ZTA 1807, dealing with ADUs, helps streamline the process for creating accessory dwelling units. ADUs provide several benefits to the community, including increasing affordable housing, allowing senior citizens to age in place, and increasing housing diversity in the building form. Over the next 25 years, our senior population will roughly double from today about 12% to close to 20%. It is, in fact, it's the only age group of our population that's actually growing as a proportion of our population. Increasing Montgomery's current average ADU production, which has been less than 50 units per year over the last 5 years, is an important way to combat the housing crisis. We ask you please support ZTA 1807. Lastly, according to an analysis at George Mason University, Montgomery will need to produce roughly 6,200 units of housing per year through 2040 to meet demand. And right now, we are only producing half of that. Solving our housing crisis will include both preserving and expanding housing options in the county. We urge the Council to implement the land use reforms needed to solve our housing crisis. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Pete. I just wanted to share a few brief thoughts. I really want to thank Pete and John for a meeting that we had recently to discuss ADUs. And earlier this summer, when this ZTA was scheduled, I had communicated publicly that I was soliciting suggestions about additional changes that we might make. Then I met with John and Pete, and John shared with me a book called The Backdoor Revolution, written by the Portland policy expert on ADUs. And it describes how that community resolved some of the issues affecting ADU production and began to see a very strong, thriving market for missing middle housing, which is that housing that is not so expensive that, you know, a family can't get a start in a unit like that. And so I read that book with delight and compiled a long list of recommendations for the council to consider, and I ultimately concluded that it was, personally, I felt too many for this existing ZTA, and it would be best to start with a fresh one. So I have put in that request. But this ZTA deals with one of the long-standing concerns about the process, which is the kind of trial nature of it and how unpredictable it can make the decision making. So the committee has sought to take away, or at least resolve, that long-standing problem, which we have seen has not, the committee, we've marveled at how few units are being created, and we've, but I think now it's probably clear that that's really because of all the restrictions on whether you can do one, not so much because, there aren't, it's not complicated. But in any event, I commend this book called The Backdoor Revolution about the experience in Portland, and there are communities where they produce 500 or 600 of these units a year. I don't think we would likely get up to San Francisco's level of 2,000, but who knows? But I think we had a fellow who just did some research. I think we're at like 40, so we're not even at a fraction of what is possible. This issue, addressing the decision-making process will help, but it's actually the underlying restrictions that are preventing the units from being created, in my opinion, rather than the complexity of the decision-making process that those restrictions require making. Mr. Leventhal.
Thank you. I'm not sure to whom to direct my question, so I'm going to direct it to Chairman Anderson and to Mr. Zients. If an area of the county is in moratorium because of inadequate school capacity, would that in any way affect approvals of accessory apartments in that area? Is there any linkage there in the law?
Well, I think it would be de minimis under the SSP.
Well, you would have to subdivide the lot, right? And then you don't subdivide a lot with an accessory
That's right.
dwelling.
Not subject to that.
But even if you did, you'd be de minimis with one unit.
No.
Well, okay. I also just wanted to thank Professor Tellis. You're a provocative academic, and I appreciate your willingness to make the linkage here publicly between zoning and residential segregation. It's abundantly clear to me as I leave the council that if the next generation of elected officials want to get really serious about viewing every issue through a racial equity lens, which was a promise that most of us made during the recently concluded primary election campaign, the location of housing and the density of housing is going to be front and center in that conversation, and you've made that point. So zoning has benefits, but it also has substantial drawbacks in terms of keeping individuals of certain incomes in one area and individuals of lower incomes in another area, and that was always its explicit intent going back to the city of Euclid that started the whole thing. So I appreciate you making that point. I think it's a point that the next round of elected officials is increasingly going to confront. And if we're serious about discussing racial equity, if we're not, then we'll continue to be most responsive to those residents with the most agency who are the ones living on the largest lots.
I agree with your comments, Mr. Leventhal. Thank you. That concludes this panel. Appreciate all of your community leadership and participation. We'll move to the next. Agenda item number 8. This is a public hearing on zoning text amendment 1808, site plan amendment, solar collection systems. This ZTA would, under certain circumstances, allow solar collection systems without an amendment to a previously approved site plan. It would also generally amend the provisions for a permit that is exempt from conformance to an approved site plan. The Fed Committee work session on the CTA is tentatively scheduled for Thursday, September 13th. That's this week. Persons wishing to submit additional material for the council's consideration should do so before the close of business today. And our speakers include Jim Driscoll and Shane Paulin. And Mr. Anderson. You're up first, Mr. Anderson.
I'm still Casey Anderson, and we support this ZTA with a suggestion that's similar to the one we made about the ADU ZTA that was just discussed. Specifically, we think that this ZTA might benefit from providing for solar collection systems for applicants with a site plan amendment, in fact, through the minor site plan amendment process, which would mean that the planning director could approve the request.
Excuse me, it took me over 2 hours to get here in public transportation, and I'm sorry I'm late, but you're not taking my house away. You're trying to take my house away because I can't pay the goddamn property taxes, but you're not taking it away. I'm going to do
Thank you.
nonviolent resistance.
Thank you very much.
And my son's going to have an accessory apartment.
Okay.
Under the minor site plan amendment process, the planning director could approve the solar collection system without a public hearing, that is to say administratively, if no objection is received from any member of the public within 50 days of the application notice being sent. So that would be a very streamlined way of addressing this issue, but still retain the ability to raise objections in the event that someone has issues with the application.
Okay, I hope that a staff member from my office or another office is speaking with the individual we just heard from. Not you, Mr. Anderson. Shane Paulin.
Good afternoon. For the record, my name is Shane Poland. I am the Director of Development of the Duffy Companies. I've testified before you before, but the Duffy Companies are a third-generation real estate development firm who have been headquartered in Montgomery County since 1953. Our specialty over the last decade has become high-performance green building, and I'm here today and testify in support of a ZTA, which would allow for a streamlined process to install a solar collection system on property in Montgomery County. That was the point of the ZTA. I think that without going through all the details, I think we can all agree that there are benefits to installing solar as a source of electricity. The problem is, and I think there's a theme, Council President, you mentioned concern about process and unpredictability, and I think that those are the things that I'm concerned about with even a limited site plan amendment process. That nonetheless, you still have to hire a civil engineer. You might be coming back to amend a plan that was created years and years ago by another engineer. You likely would have to hire a land use attorney. You'd have to come through a lot of what is still process to install a solar panel. And I feel like there should be some way, some number of parameters that can be defined that would not require an applicant to go through that process to simply install some solar. Maybe it's not a ton of solar, but it's some solar. We've just recently completed, we chose to keep our location, our headquarters for the Duffy Companies in Montgomery County. We've just relocated to Colesville a year ago. We built ourselves a LEED Platinum headquarters, and we're very proud of the building, and we wanted to put some solar on it. And we have been through the process, and staff was great to work with, but it was nonetheless a process. It was a lot of back and forth. There were a lot of planned amendments. It took a long time. It took a lot of money. And ultimately, we spent more than 25% of the cost of our solar on the process to come through a limited site plan amendment. And again, I fully recognize that it was not the smoothest process, but partly it wasn't smooth because the company we hired to install solar said, oh, no problem. You know, most jurisdictions, we take care of the permitting process. But then they ended up wading into a site plan amendment process. And that was not something they were used to dealing with. And by the time we realized that the train was off the tracks, a lot of time and a lot of money had gone by. And so I'd say if we found a method in Montgomery County that we can build buildings without site plans, namely standard method application, if you could build a building, can we not find some parameters to install some solar panels that don't require an amendment to a site plan. And I think there's room to find that, and I really appreciate everybody's willingness to listen and to hear about this thing. We've already resolved our issue. We've gotten our site plan approval. And so I'm here testifying really for either myself as a future project or other businesses who would like to do this in the future. Thank you to Brian on Councilmember Hucker's staff, who's really also talked through this issue with us in detail. And I simply would request your support of some way to avoid going through that process. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Poland. Jim Driscoll.
Thanks for the opportunity. Does that do it? Thank you. Jim Driscoll, I'm the coordinator of the Montgomery County chapter of the Climate Mobilization, and I'm a resident in Bethesda, and I'm here speaking for a coalition that we put together last year. I want to begin by thanking all the members of the council for voting for the climate emergency resolution back on December 5th and setting goals. I just want to remind folks that it's 80% by 27. It's not just 100% by 35, because sometimes that first one gets slipped over. We put together this coalition after the resolution to try and implement it, and we've all had the opportunity to deal with each other on that. And we put together a legislative agenda, which all of you saw some time back, and one of the items on the agenda was this zoning text amendment. And that coalition gathered on Sunday. There were 300 of us over in the executive office building, cafeteria, in the rain and the wind. And as we sit here waiting to see what yet another climate-fueled hurricane is going to do to our area at the end of a summer during which the climate has gone somewhat berserk all over the world, I hope you're all sort of taking some pleasure in saying, well, we thought of it at least, we took some action, and now the question is, what are we going to do to implement it? So I've included an article in my written remarks, which is sort of more stories like the one you've just heard, that basically say permitting makes it twice as expensive to do solar power in the United States as in Australia and other countries. I recommend that to your attention. Solar obviously is one way to reduce the greenhouse gas emissions from the county, but it also eliminates the loss of energy in the transmission of the electricity, and it gives us more local control over sources of electricity as we go into this crisis. I want to acknowledge the leadership of the Sierra Club in this matter, and Stephanie Riddick in particular, and Tom Hucker for bringing this very important amendment. We're going through a community planning. I look forward to testifying, and we'll be back for, hopefully, for the bills that Councilmember Elrich is bringing forward on solar, and we're bringing, we have a planning process going forward to bring a new set of initiatives for you to consider in December. I just close by saying it's not just a problem for our children and our grandchildren. It's becoming increasingly clear that everybody who lives here now is going to be being affected by climate change. Thank you.
Certainly is true, Jim. Thank you. All right. That concludes this panel. Appreciate your participation today. Mr. Leventhal.
I'd like to be added as a co-sponsor on zoning text amendment 1808.
Thank you. And noted. Next item. Zoning text amendment 1809, landscape contractors, rural cluster zone. Casey Cerner is our speaker. This is a public hearing on 1809, landscape contractors, rural cluster zone. The ZTA would amend the definition of landscape contractor, amend the provision for exempted lots, parcels, and buildings in the rural cluster zone as it affects landscape contractors, and generally amend the provisions for landscape contractors. A Fed committee work session is tentatively scheduled for Thursday, the 13th, and if you have materials, you should submit them before the end of the business today. Casey Anderson first.
I'm Casey Anderson, and the Planning Board supports this CTA. We believe that it accommodates some of the existing landscapers and related uses in this particular, in one particular part of the county, without the need for a minor master plan amendment and without the potential to disrupt certain land use policies elsewhere in the county. So we are pleased to support it, to try to accommodate existing businesses without doing violence to our other policies as they may apply in this neighborhood and elsewhere. Thank you.
Thank you. Casey Cerner.
Good afternoon. For the record, Casey Cerner with the law firm of Miles and Stockbridge. I represent McNew Investments and Steve Beaver, who own 4 properties on the north side of Sandy Spring Road in Burtonsville, all classified in the RC zone. Mr. Beaver operates a landscape contractor business at 4408 Sandy Spring Road, as well as the 3 contiguous properties that he owns in part. On behalf of my client, I urge the council to adopt ZTA 1809. It's a prudent policy decision. It will remove a barrier for small businesses while also respecting the purpose and intent of the RC zone. It also supports and follows the master plans, as it includes provisions that will require conditional use for certain expansions and diversifications of the use. An important component to the ZTA is that it expands the definition of landscape contractors to align that with the services that these folks do actually provide, as landscape contractors kind of evolve into more of a year-round business. And it will also produce a more consistent interpretation of landscape contractor. But in specific, the adoption of the ZTA will positively impact my clients. It will allow him to continue operating a business. He's been operating at this location for 17 years. In fact, he started his business 30 years ago in Burtonsville, and he was displaced from I-1 zoned property at the corner of Route 198 and Maryland Route 29 when SHA came in to make the improvements for Route 29. So he relocated down the street on Sandy Spring Road and eventually acquired the 3 other properties contiguous to him. His properties are sandwiched between an existing wholesale nursery as well as a landscape contractor. And in fact, there are other landscape contractors along this corridor of Sandy Spring Road, as well as a semi-famous lawnmower repair business and a BGE substation, as well as property classified in the NR zone. So this part of the corridor, Sandy Spring Road, is predominantly commercial. With the adoption of the ZTA, it will be consistent with the development pattern along this corridor. And unfortunately, 2 years ago, these properties became the subject of a DPS enforcement action, and we have been working for the past 2 years to try to resolve that. And we really appreciate the assistance from Councilmember Hucker's office as well as Councilmember Florine's office in finding a resolution. Thank you.
Thank you, Casey. Very good. That concludes this panel. And now we'll move to agenda item 10. This is a public hearing on Bill 2618, Landlord-Tenant Relations Accessory Apartment Licensing. This bill would amend the licensing procedures for an accessory apartment rental license, amend the process for appeals, objections, and waivers, and generally amend county law relating to accessory apartment licensing. A Fed Committee work session is tentatively scheduled for Monday, September 24th. And those wishing to submit material for the council's consideration should do so before the close of business, September 18th. And we have Vaughn Brooks Little.
So I'm privileged. Huh?
Welcome. We're glad you're here. You'll press the button at the base of that microphone. Yep.
Thank you. Good afternoon, and thank you, County Council President Rima, and the County Council. My name is Yvonne Brooks Little. Most of you have heard my story about how I worked in Montgomery County for years as a radiation therapist, integrated health professional, and transportation administrator, and at retirement ended up couch surfing because there was no place I could afford to rent. Then an apartment opened up at Victory Court Apartments right across the street, and I have been happy to live there affordably since then. What I've learned from living in Victory Court and from being a leader at Bethel World Outreach Church is that there are many, many people besides me who need affordable housing. People from all different backgrounds, as we all know from the rental housing study. There are thousands of people who are rent burdened, paying more than 30% or even more than 50% of their income on rent. In particular, there are many seniors who have lived in Montgomery County, paid taxes, and helped to make this a great community, but who have to move far away when they retire because they can't afford to stay. I am encouraged by the solution-oriented bills before us today. Thank you, County Council President Rima, for your bill to make it easier to create accessory dwelling units in Montgomery County. This bill is particularly helpful for seniors. Much of the county's single-family housing stock is owned by seniors who have more bedrooms and space than they need. But downsizing often costs more than staying in their big homes. And many want to age in place. Many communities have used ADUs as a way for seniors to make their homes into 2 units, allowing them to stay in their homes while providing an additional unit of housing, usually at a much more affordable rate to someone else. These units, these second units also provide a measure of safety as the seniors now have someone else keeping an eye on them. The Montgomery Housing Alliance strongly encourages you to support President Rima's bill and ZTA as a common sense way to increase the number of affordable housing units that disperses them throughout the county. Additionally, the Housing Alliance supports Councilmember Florine's ZTA to increase density for developers who increase the percentage of affordable housing they put in their properties. It is a good incentive to increase the development of affordable housing. We would like to see the legislation change in one key way.
Uh-oh.
We ask that.
Please, one sentence if you could.
Okay. We ask that the increased density only be granted when the percentage of MPDUs are at least 2.5% above the requirement for the zoning area, rather than 15% across the board.
Thank you very much, Ms. Brooks Little.
Thank you.
Appreciate your testimony. Your testimony on accessory dwelling units reminded me we need to think about these units as a good thing that we want rather than a bad thing we're trying to prevent, not something to restrict and make so hard, but something to encourage and support. So,
thank you.
Thank you. And our final item for the day, expedited bill 2718, taxation, development impact tax credits, and local area transportation review mitigation payments. This is a public hearing on that bill, which would authorize a transportation impact tax credit for certain expenses paid by a property owner for improvements listed in a unified mobility program or the White Oak Local Area Transportation Improvement Program. This bill would extend the time for the county to spend transportation impact taxes to equal the time transportation impact tax credits remain valid. Change the time to certify an impact tax credit from the issuance of a building permit to the collection of the impact tax, and generally amend the law governing the administration of development impact tax for transportation improvements. A GO committee work session is tentatively scheduled for Monday, September 24th. Persons wishing to submit additional materials for our consideration should do so before the close of business September 18th. We have Bob Harris, Matthew Hoffman, and Dan Wilhelm. And we'll proceed. Oh, Shane Poland is, are you additional or are you subbing? Okay. All right. Not sure. Oh, gotcha. Thank you. Mr. Harris, you're up first.
Okay, good afternoon. For the record, I'm Bob Harris of Lurch Early Brewer, appearing on behalf of Cabin Branch Management, the master developer of the Cabin Branch community in Clarksburg. The purpose of my testimony is to support this bill, along with a limited amendment to it to ensure that developers who make improvements to county roads pursuant to requirements of their development approvals can obtain impact tax credits for those improvements. The amendment is necessary because, although I believe the code provides for an impact tax credit for a road improvement required by the Cabin Branch approvals, the Department of Transportation states that the current wording of the code does not allow that. I'm attaching for you a copy of the Planning Board resolution approving the Cabin Branch project. In that approval, Under county APFO regulations, Cabot Branch was required to make various road improvements to provide transportation capacity for the project. One of those required improvements, as called for in the Clarksburg Master Plan, was the complete reconstruction of West Old Baltimore Road to transform it from a narrow, winding country road, only about 18 feet wide, to a road that meets full county arterial standards with an 80-foot right-of-way and paving a minimum of 38 feet wide, together with turn lanes, a sidewalk, and a hiker-biker trail, as well as proper storm drainage, lighting, and other improvements. The Planning Board, with the recommendation of DOT, determined at the time of that development approval that complete reconstruction was necessary in order to add required transportation capacity for the project, and the attached traffic analysis confirms the addition of that traffic capacity. Nevertheless, DOT states that they cannot grant a credit for a major part of that project because it does not fall within their interpretation of the credit provisions. The slight revision to the ordinance that we are proposing, a copy of which is attached to my testimony, will clarify that the intent of the ordinance is to provide such credits to those who make road improvements required under their APFO review for development. In short, if the county requires improvements to a county road to provide APFO traffic capacity for a project, then the county should allow an impact tax credit when the developer constructs those improvements. Without such credits, the county would be left with the obligations to build master planned road improvements, and that's not anyone's intention. Thank you.
Thank you, Bob. Matthew Hoffman. All right. Dan Wilhelm.
For the record, my name is Dan Wilhelm. Welcome back after hopefully an enjoyable vacation. And this has actually been a pleasant series of testimonies, like everybody's agreeing, so I don't see that too often. Anyway, there's widespread support in the community for transportation projects that address existing congestion and provide capacity to support planned development. These improvements include those the council approved as part of the White Oak Local Area Transportation Program. We have been encouraging the developers to make such improvements rather than the county making them. As everyone agreed when the LATIP program was approved, developers can make the improvements faster and likely at less cost than the county. Both the Duffy companies and GLDC have expressed willingness to make such improvements if it doesn't increase their cost. The Duffy companies have proposed a number of good improvements in the Hillendale area, but they need to be able to receive credits for both the LATIP fee and the transportation impact fee. This was the original intent, but the language in the existing legislation doesn't allow credits against the impact tax until the developer has spent the estimated cost for the LATIP. The proposed bill would correct this situation and simply allow the original intent to happen. We support this bill. Thank you.
Thank you, Dan. Shane Poland.
For the record, again, Shane Poland, Director of Development of the Duffy Companies. Again, thank you for your time and thank you for your consideration of this important bill that I really do view as a corrective matter. As many of you will recall, I was here testifying when LATIP was originally established, requesting the ability to put improvements onto the roads and to receive a credit for doing that rather than simply paying and going. I know that that's not often what's done, but it's what we felt was important for our projects, particularly our most recent project. One of them is we're building, I mentioned in our last testimony, that we moved our headquarters up the street to Colesville. We used to be in Hillendale, and that location in Hillendale will now be one of the county's newest hotels. We're building a Home 2 Suites by Hilton, and we're seeking a LEED Platinum certification on that hotel. That will make it, I think, one of the first 6 Platinum certified hotels in North America. We have some fees to pay. We have identified some improvements. I would like to be able to take our fees and to put them into the physical improvements. And as currently drafted, we can't really do that unless it goes over the cost of an improvement as identified in LATIP. Nothing should go over the cost of the improvement as identified recently in the LATIP because it was the cost of the improvements were set as the cost of the improvement And so, again, it's a little bit nonsensical, what was written. I don't think it meets the intent. And so all we're asking for is this clarification to allow us to put some improvements on the road. Our other project briefly is a partnership with HOC, and they are also in support of this measure. Thank you.
Very good. Well, that concludes that panel.
Thank you.
Thank you for your participation, and that concludes our work today. We are now adjourned for the week, and committees will continue their work. So be safe, everyone out there in the eye of the hurricane.